Chapter 1381. With the mobile restaurant, it was naturally very convenient to enter the city. Without alerting the Grey Temple, the mobile restaurant landed in front of the factory dormitory. The ladder was put down, and all the elves left in an orderly manner under Irina's lead. The dormitory, which had its lights switched off, was quickly lit up again. Menacing arrows were aimed at the mobile restaurant and the crowd below. "I'm back." Irina raised her hand, and the light lit up, illuminating her and the 600 elves. "It's your highness." "Withdraw the arrows," the captain ordered, and the archers withdrew their bows. Meg waved at Irina from above the mobile restaurant. Irina nodded slightly, and the ladder was withdrawn slowly. The mobile restaurant disappeared in a flash, and appeared above Amy's almost instantly. After putting down the ladder, Meg carried Amy and Ugly Duckling, who were already asleep, down. It was midnight, and the restaurant was already closed. Gina should be asleep already. Is this Chaos City? Jane followed Meg down from the mobile restaurant, and looked around curiously. She could see a very big square under the moonlight, but she couldn't see further. She could only vaguely see many houses. This was a big city, even bigger than Carapace Island. "Jane, come downstairs with me. I'll arrange a place for you to stay," Meg said to Jane, and then carried Amy downstairs. He placed her gently on the bed, took off her shoes, and covered her with a blanket. Then, he arranged for Jane to stay in Amy's playground, and made her a mattress on the floor. Meg didn't like others sleeping in his bed, and the study wasn't suitable for sleeping. Hence, he could only let Jane sleep in Amy's playground for the night, and arrange for her to stay at the dormitory tomorrow. "It's a little shabby. I'll change a room for you tomorrow. Just make do with it tonight," Meg said to Jane apologetically. "It's all right. It's super nice here, and there are so many interesting things." Jane looked at the toys around her curiously. Her gaze fell on the swing in the corner, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. "If you want to play, don't be restrained. Xiao Mi is very generous." Meg glanced at the swing. It should be very rare on Carapace Island. Jane blushed and responded in a voice as soft as a mosquito. "Good night then." Meg turned around and prepared to leave. "Boss, are you really not a demon?" Jane looked up at Meg's back. "Yes, I'm Meg, the boss of Amy's. Just like what we promised earlier, forget everything that happened on Carapace Island and start a new life here," Meg said with a smile. "Then Lady Boss, only the four of us know about this. I hope that you can keep this a secret until I'm certain that I'll make it public." "All right, I got it." Jane nodded with a serious expression. Although she didn't quite understand why the boss wanted to hide his relationship with the lady boss, she still knew what to say and what not to say. "Rest early. You've worked hard today." Meg closed the door for Jane and went back to the balcony to drag down Hariti and her servant who were still locked up. Although she had been starving for a few days, Hariti looked even more gentle and charming. She tried her best to make eyes at Meg and tried to seduce him the moment she saw him. Meg didn't fall for it. He slapped each of them until they fainted and threw them into the little dark room on the balcony. He would wait for Irina to come back to decide how to deal with them. As women, these two didn't deserve to die. However, if he let them go just like that, someone would definitely find out something, and it might be disadvantageous to them. Meg didn't mind killing them to silence them. After all, Hariti was as famous as succubi. He didn't dare to keep a ticking time bomb that tried to seduce him all day long. He was also a man, after all. If he were to get drunk one day, Meg didn't want to tell Irina a drunken story on a rainy night. If all the men in the world had my awareness, then there wouldn't be any scumbags. Meg locked the door of the little dark room and sighed with emotion. "Is that so?" Irina appeared on the balcony and asked Meg with a smile. "Ahem." Meg coughed dryly and said awkwardly, "Why are you back so soon?" "Ashley will make arrangements for them. Anyway, the dormitory and things are ready-made. I don't need to look after them," Irina said. "By the way, how should we deal with Simmons's mistress and guard?" Meg pointed at the little dark room and asked. "Bury them. It's simple." Irina didn't think too much about it. "Ah," Meg muttered, "then why did we bring them back?" "I'll have to ask you that." Irina's gaze was somewhat scrutinizing. I'm innocent. Meg was dumbfounded. What was this? Irina looked at Meg's expression and chuckled. She thought for a moment and said, "Forget it. Let them sign a contract to sell themselves and then throw them into the factory to burn the boiler. We'll let them go after the limelight dies down. My wife is wise." Meg gave her a thumbs up. Only Irina could come up with the idea of making the delicate ghost mother shovel coal and burn the boiler. Of course, he agreed unconditionally. He didn't dare to object. The signing of the contract went very smoothly. Under Irina's pressure, Charlene and that female demon didn't dare to object at all. They were already very lucky to be able to survive. How could they care about how many unfair terms were listed in the contract? Moreover, they were going to be sent to burn the boiler. 2 golden rays of light entered between their eyebrows. The 2 contracts floated up and burned to ashes in the golden flames. The God of Light has already verified this contract. If you violate the contract, the holy light will melt you to death. Irina looked at the 2 and said. The 2 demons quickly nodded. Irina stretched out her hand and knocked on the spherical mud shell. The mud shell suddenly dissipated, and the 2 naked demons appeared in front of Meg. Meg's eyebrows just raised a little, and the dazzling holy light had already lit up. Oh, this damn holy light. Meg consciously left the small dark room. Fortunately, he didn't see anything. Otherwise, his eyes wouldn't have been as simple as blinking for a moment. After a good night's sleep, Meg woke up early the next day. He went downstairs and wrote a new notice to replace the original notice hanging on the door. "I'm Meg, I'm back." After thinking about it, Meg felt that it was too pretentious. He took back the notice and added, "Business as usual today." Sure enough, it's more comfortable at home. Meg looked around his restaurant. He hadn't seen it for a few days. Even the devil's ivy hanging on the wooden railing had become more beautiful. "Boss, you're back." Raina opened the door and came in. She was surprised to see Meg standing in the middle of the restaurant. No, let me see." Yarbemia squeezed in and looked at Meg. She suddenly burst into tears. "Boss, I finally waited for you. Fortunately, I didn't give up." Chapter 1382. Meg looked at Yarbemia, Elizabeth, and the rest who came in with a smile on his face. They had not seen each other for a few days, and he felt very close to them. They were the reason why he was able to establish himself in Chaos City, a group of outstanding and powerful service staff. Meg swept his gaze across everyone. Even Connie was here, and Camilla was the only one missing. He asked, "Where's Camilla?" "Big sister Camilla said she had to go home after you all left. She hasn't returned yet." Mia shook her head and said, "Do you think she doesn't want to come anymore?" Everyone knew about Camilla's identity. She was the famous countess. It was indeed not befitting of her status to be in charge of chopping vegetables in the restaurant every day. "She's not back yet." Meg raised his eyebrows. He had already heard about the incident with the vampires, but he wasn't sure about Camilla's situation. Now that he thought about it, he should have made a trip to the vampires yesterday. "You didn't expect that I, Camilla, would be back again, right?" Right at this moment, the restaurant's door was suddenly pulled open. Camilla leaned against the door domineeringly, and looked at everyone from the corner of her eyes. "Are you running away from your marriage?" Meg asked with a smile. Camilla's expression changed slightly. Could the news have reached Chaos City? She retracted her hand from the door, and walked into the restaurant with an unnatural expression. Who said that? Do I look like a vampire who needs to run away from her marriage? Then let's take it that way, Meg said non-committally with a nod. "Boss, is the princess back?" Firis asked expectantly as she walked up. Meg almost said that she was upstairs. Firis stayed in the dormitory, so she shouldn't know that Irina came back last night. On second thought, when he went out, Irina went out with him. When he came back, Irina came back too. This would seem too synchronized, as though they were traveling together. That didn't seem right. He shook his head and said, "I don't know, either. Can we have breakfast now? I'm hungry." At this moment, Irina walked down the stairs and asked naturally. Everyone looked in the direction of the staircase. Their gazes fell on Irina, and after a while, it fell on Meg. They were all puzzled. Although the boss and Princess Irina left for different reasons the last time they left, they returned at the same time this time, didn't they? Furthermore, why were the words and actions of asking for breakfast so familiar and natural? Hey, Princess Irina, did you also come back today? What a coincidence. Meg said with exaggerated surprise and winked at Irina. He had already felt the unusual atmosphere at the scene. The collision of the 6 senses of 10 women might lead to some bad inferences. Everyone is here. It's quite early to go to work today. Irina also felt the strange atmosphere, but there was no panic on her face. She still walked down slowly, glanced at Meg, and said in a flat tone, "Do I need to report to you when I come back?" "This is Princess Irina." The women suddenly felt the powerful aura of a queen, and immediately got rid of the immature thoughts in their minds. It was impossible between the boss and Princess Irina. Isn't that? Meg blushed with shame. Although Irina easily solved the problem with one sentence, he felt a little uncomfortable when he heard it. Even if he couldn't control Irina, he was still a landlord. Water. Irina raised her eyebrows. Meg subconsciously wanted to get a cup of water. Phyllis had already walked forward quickly, into the kitchen to get a cup of warm water, and gently put it in front of Irina, and said softly, "Princess, do you need anything else?" "There's no need." Irina picked up the cup and took a sip. She looked at Phyllis, and said, "Bean Sprout, you've been working hard during this period." "No, I just made a small mistake. Look, your chest is so small that it's almost sunken in." Irina looked at Phyllis's chest with a worried expression. Phyllis widened her eyes and stared at Irina. Was the princess that she was familiar with back again? "It's all right, you can still save some fabric." Irina looked up and comforted her. "I don't want to save any fabric at all." Phyllis roared in her heart. "Hey, I heard that your grass-eating uncle has become a primogenitor. Will you vampires become vegetarians in the future?" Irina's gaze fell on Camilla, who was trying to hide in the corner, and asked curiously, "We are pure vampires, and have received special training. We definitely won't eat grass," Camilla said with a serious expression. "But Dracula had a lot of fun eating grass back then," Irina said with a smile. "Unless we can't defeat him," Camilla added helplessly. She had seen Dracula eating grass with her own eyes. That scene was really fresh. Although the vampires had lost a lot of reputation points because of this incident, she did not have any dislike or hatred for Irina. Wasn't it her goal to become a powerful woman who could do whatever she wanted? Moreover, even Uncle Dracula himself did not have any hatred for Irina. He often expressed his admiration for her, so she had no reason to hate her. "Hehe, it seems like you have a good relationship with Dracula. Even the words you say are exactly the same as what he said back then. However, we split the ticket price 80% with him back then. He must have been living extravagantly in those years," Irina said with a smile. "There's such a thing." Camilla's eyes widened. She felt as if she had heard something incredible. She didn't expect Uncle Dracula and Irina to do this together. They were not forced. Thinking about it carefully, Uncle Dracula, who had always been known as the stingiest vampire, did suddenly become extravagant. Meg also raised his eyebrows. Indeed, any historical event, from the perspective of those who experienced it personally, was often far from the legends and records. However, this would probably also become an unerasable point in the life of Ancestor Dracula, who had just become the ancestor of vampires. Speaking of which, aren't you guys going to have breakfast? Irina glanced at the clock on the wall. She did not have supper last night, so she was already a little hungry. Breakfast? Amy is hungry too. Amy jumped out of the staircase with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Then, she threw Ugly Duckling onto a chair at the side and pounced on MIA and the rest with open arms. She happily said, "Big sisters, I missed you so much." MIA picked up Amy and smiled. "We missed Amy too." "Amy, your 2 masters have been to the restaurant many times," Anna said softly. "It's okay. I will go to class today. They must have missed me too much." "It's really worrying," Amy said maturely with a sigh. "There are so many people." Jane stood at the staircase and looked at the beautiful ladies in the restaurant. Then, she quickly shrank her head back and grabbed the hem of her dress nervously. For a moment, she did not know how to appear. Oh, yes. I want to introduce a new companion to everyone today. Meg looked at the staircase and smiled. Jane, come on out. Chapter 1383. Jane. Everyone looked curiously in the direction of the stairs. After a while, a young girl in a red-maid uniform came down with her head slightly lowered. She lifted the hem of her skirt and bowed stiffly to everyone. Her face was red as she said, "Hello. Hello everyone, I'm Jane. Big sister Little Golden Horn, don't be nervous." "They are all super nice big sisters," Amy said with a warm smile as she went forward and grabbed Jane's hand. "What a cute little golden horn. It's like a dreamy glass. Can I touch it?" Mia said to Jane with a smile as she stepped forward. "Is it cute?" Jane's eyes lit up as she looked up at Yarbemia. She also had a pair of golden dragon horns on her head. She was instantly infected by that energetic smile, and nodded slightly. "Millimeter. Mia reached out to touch Jane's horn gently. It was cold and smooth to the touch, just like a crystal. However, she quickly retracted her hand with a smile. "Hello, Jane. I am Yarbemia. I seem to be a few years older than you. You can call me Big Sister Mia." "Big Sister Mia," Jane said softly. She felt warm in her heart instantly. It seemed like she had another friend. "Hello, I am Connie. Can I touch your horn too?" Connie came forward and looked at Jane's horn enviously. "Millimeter. Jane nodded slightly with a red face. She didn't know why her horn, which had been mocked since she was young, was liked by everyone here. However, this feeling was really great. "I'm so envious. Why can't I have such a beautiful horn?" Connie touched Jane's horn as her two pinkish-white beast ears drooped. Everyone went forward to greet Jane, and the atmosphere was very harmonious. Meg looked at Jane's face that gradually brightened up, and a smile appeared on his face. He turned and went into the kitchen to make breakfast for everyone. He had to make a scrumptious breakfast today as a reward for the ladies who worked hard while he was away. When he returned to the restaurant last night, the system reported the income for the past few days to him. After deducting the costs, the net profit was more than 1 million copper coins. On the other hand, all his hard work on Carapace Island had only earned him a few 100,000 copper coins. This was a hen that could lay golden eggs by itself. Even if Meg retired, he wouldn't have to worry about money for the rest of his life. Raina's hot pot and Phyllis's beef kebabs were enough to support half of the restaurant when he wasn't around. "Boss, are you going to launch a new dish during this trip?" Mia came to the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. She said with some lingering fear, "The customers have already said that if you can't release a new product that satisfies everyone, they will starve to death in front of the restaurant." The girls also looked at Meg curiously. He had been out to collect ingredients for 5 days, which had already broken the record of time spent out to collect ingredients. They wondered what kind of delicacy he would be cooking this time. "It's okay. As long as they reach the entrance of the restaurant, they won't starve to death," Meg said calmly. She turned around and looked at the curious girls. She smiled mysteriously and said, "You will know at noon. Looks like it will be a very delicious delicacy." Yarbemia's eyes lit up. She could tell from Meg's relaxed and confident expression that it would definitely satisfy everyone. "Oh my God. Am I seeing things? Mr. Mac is back." "No. You're not seeing things. Mr. Mac is really back." No. I'm too excited. I'm a little dizzy. Take him away." "Next one. Don't take him away. Help me up. I want to eat another bowl of Yangju fried rice made by Mr. Mac himself." At the entrance of the restaurant, the customers who had seen the announcement went crazy. In these 5 days without Mr. Mac, they experienced what it meant to have a day pass like a year. "Sisters, we must make Mr. Mac give us a second bowl of tofu pudding today to compensate for the loss of our beauty treatments," a rich lady shouted. "Agreed. Seconded." The women in the line all raised their hands in agreement. In these 5 days without tofu pudding, they felt that they had become a lot more haggard. Even their confidence in front of men had been reduced. "Can you count me in?" A man's voice was weak. "Go away," the women shouted in unison. It was these men who had taken their share. Sometimes, they wouldn't be able to eat if they came late. At 6:30 a.m., Meg, who had finished breakfast, went out to give out the love breakfast to the cleaners. "Mr. Mac, you're so cruel. Do you know how sad I am to leave a pregnant woman like me behind?" A pregnant woman with a big belly complained tearfully. "Meg. Irina, let me explain, Mr. Mac, did you see my heart?" "No. Liar, you've obviously taken her heart away, but now you're pretending that you don't know." Uncle, don't be like this. I'm a little scared." Meg took 2 steps back and looked at the bearded uncle in horror. "Mr. Mac, did you see my belly?" Harrison stroked his own belly. "That's fat." Meg said sternly. "No, I mean, I've been starving for the past few days when you weren't around." "Then I really can't tell." Meg looked at Harrison's still eye-catching belly and shook his head. After not seeing them for 5 days, Meg was really frightened by the crazy enthusiasm of the customers. He didn't know how MIA and the others had managed to survive the past few days. It must have been hard on them. "Mr. Mac, will there be a new product today?" George was squeezed out of shape by the crowd, and he asked Meg with determination. "There will be a new product at noon. Please look forward to it." Meg answered the question that everyone was very concerned about with a smile. "Mr. Mac, we haven't had tofu pudding for many days. Can we have a second helping this morning?" The noblewoman who had gathered the customers earlier asked. "Everyone can only buy 1 helping of tofu pudding per meal, but from today onwards, the amount of tofu pudding per meal will be increased from 300 bowls to 400 bowls, Meg said with a smile. The second helping was non-negotiable. Everyone was a little disappointed, but they smiled at the additional 100 servings. This way, even if they came a little late, they would still have a chance to eat the tofu pudding. After distributing breakfast to the cleaners, Meg stood on the steps at the entrance of the restaurant and looked at the 2 long lines of customers that had been restored. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry to have made everyone wait for so long, but it's okay. You'll get used to it in the future. Get lost." The customers roared in unison. They were just short of throwing rotten eggs and vegetables. Was this guy still planning to stand them up? Chapter 1384. "Heh, you want to sneak up on me?" Meg dodged a pink sachet and walked into the restaurant without looking back. "Idiot, he dodged my sachet. Mr. Mac is indeed not a normal man." A young girl stomped her foot shyly. Normal men can't find a wife, but Mr. Mac is different. He's single because of his own ability, Harrison teased when he saw this scene. "Heh, Mr. Mac may be single, but there are so many beautiful girls waiting in line for him to nod his head. Besides, he has a little boss," George said with a smile. "Stop it. I'm jealous." A horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of Amy's, and Gloria walked out. Her eyes lit up when she saw the long line in front of the restaurant. She murmured to herself, "The customers are so happy. Could it be that Mr. Meg is back?" She immediately attracted the attention of many customers as soon as she got out of the horse-drawn carriage. Many of the regulars were familiar with this beautiful and dignified young lady. They had heard that she was the young mistress of the family Morton, the granddaughter of the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and the owner of Suede Clothing. Young and promising, that was probably the best description for someone like her. Suede Clothing had been transformed from a textile workshop, and had become a rising star in the clothing industry in Chaos City in just a few months. It had also become the hottest shop among the socialites. It was said that because of the impact of Suede Clothing, many tailors' business had deteriorated significantly. They no longer had to wait in line for 2 to 3 years just to order a piece of clothing. Gloria smiled faintly when she saw that everyone was looking at her. She walked to the back of the line with a calm expression, and didn't look uncomfortable at all. She was wearing a long white down jacket today. The vertical lines of the jacket made it fluffy, but not bulky, and made her look even more slender. The warm down jacket could get rid of all the bulkiness, and she only needed to wear a light undershirt underneath. Gloria's perfect figure brought out the lines of the down jacket incisively and vividly. The soft texture got rid of the winter bloat and she walked with a different kind of confidence and calmness. This was the new down jacket that Mr. Meg had custom-made for Suede. Gloria wanted to see if Meg would be back so that he could personally confirm the sample. Also, she wanted to make a new one as a preview of the new product. Wow, is this Suede's new product? How can the cotton clothes look so good? No, I'm in love. When are we going to get married? I have to buy one. Hubby, can you lend me your hand? The eyes of the noble women in the line had already lit up. The hottest news in the circle recently was, when would Suede's new winter clothes be released? Although it was not a new thing to stuff a thick thermal jacket under one's windbreaker, if Suede could release an official winter clothes, it would definitely cause a stir in the noble women's circle in Chaos City. Now, the white jacket that Miss Gloria was wearing naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. Was this the new product from Suede? Miss Gloria, is this beautiful jacket that you're wearing Suede's new product? A noblewoman who was closer to Gloria couldn't help but ask. Yes, this is Suede's new down jacket, Gloria replied with a smile. There was a big commotion in the line. This news was simply too exciting. But what was a down jacket? How was it different from a cotton jacket? Then, when will it be released? That noblewoman asked the question that everyone was most concerned about. Gloria replied with a smile, the first batch is already in production. It will be officially released in about a week. As for the other questions, Gloria couldn't answer them for the time being because the new product hadn't been released yet. Leaving a certain amount of suspense was one of the important marketing strategies. This was what Mr. Meg had said. Amy, are you sure you want to go to school with this hairstyle today? Meg looked at Amy's pigtail. It was in the middle of her head, standing straight up like a lightning rod. This was the hairstyle that Irina had tied for Amy. It was the Teletubbies style. Amy touched her antenna and nodded her little head. Yes, yes. I like this pigtail. As long as you like it. Meg felt Irina's gaze and immediately stopped himself from tying Amy's hair. Luckily, his daughter was cute. Even if she had a Teletubbies hairstyle, she would still be cuter than a Teletubbies. He pushed the bicycle out and sent Amy to school. Hello, everyone, Amy said with a smile as she jumped out of the door and waved at the customers in line. Little boss, we missed you so much. Little boss is so cute today. Amy immediately received enthusiastic feedback from the customers. Compared to the resentment they felt towards Meg, everyone sincerely liked Amy. This bunch of superficial people who only care about looks. Meg snorted in his heart. He carried Amy onto the back seat and then put his face in front of Amy in front of everyone. More. Amy kissed Meg's cheek very cooperatively. Then she raised her two little hands and said cutely, "Let's go. Let's go." Meg smiled as he got onto the bicycle and pedaled away. What's the use of liking her? She's my daughter. Hey. He left behind a bunch of sour-smelling lemons. It was Meg's first breakfast since his return. The slightly quiet atmosphere in the restaurant for the past few days instantly warmed up. Even the battle between sweet and savory dishes that had stopped for a few days started again. It was a pity that there was no WeChat moments in this world. Otherwise, Meg felt that everyone's moments would be flooded with news of his return. Meg asked Jane to learn from MIA first and help her out when she was busy so that she could adapt to the intensity of the restaurant's work and see what kind of work was suitable for her. There are so many people. Jane looked at the restaurant full of customers. She thought that IE restaurant was already the busiest restaurant on Carapace Island. She didn't expect Amy's to be even busier than IE restaurant. Customers came and went. So many waitresses were busy, but they were still very busy. She could only help out a little. However, compared to Carapace Island, the customers here were very well-mannered and cultured even though they came from different races. They wouldn't talk loudly, and they wouldn't put their feet up on the chairs. Even when they spoke to the waitresses, they were very gentle. You wouldn't see such things on Carapace Island. What a beautiful place. It's completely different from Chaos City in my imagination, Jane thought to herself. She had new expectations for her future life. Chapter 1385. After the morning service, Meg glanced at Gloria, who was sitting in the corner of the restaurant, and said to Yarbemia, MIA, take Jane back to the dormitory first. I have expanded the dormitory by a few rooms. Let her choose one that she likes. Okay. MIA nodded and naturally held Jane's hand. She looked at her and asked, Jane, is there anything you need to take? No. Jane shook her head and glanced at the hand that was held by MIA. The warm feeling from the palm made her heart beat faster, but it also made her feel exceptionally safe and warm. Then let's go and see the new room that the boss has prepared for you. We will live together in the future. MIA smiled and held Jane's hand and left with Elizabeth and the others. Irina went out after breakfast. There were some things that the night elves needed her to do personally. For example, she needed to integrate the elves that she brought back last night into the night elves team and give them the necessary spiritual baptism so that they could establish their faith and goals again. Therefore, only Meg and Elizabeth were left in the restaurant. Meg brewed a pot of black tea and sat down opposite Gloria with the tea. He poured a cup and placed it in front of Gloria. The bright red tea rippled in the cup and emitted steam. Thank you. Gloria smiled at Meg. You're welcome. Meg smiled. Sitting with Gloria was like drinking tea with an old friend. It made him feel comfortable. The down jacket is very beautiful. It's better than I expected. It looks good on you. Meg looked at Gloria's down jacket and praised. He was worried that the tailor would make it bloated and ugly, but judging from the effect of Gloria's upper body, whether it was the filling of the down jacket or the styling, it was done very well. It basically met all his requirements on the blueprint. Judging from the way the noblewomen stared at Gloria during the meal just now, it would definitely be another piece of clothing that would cause a commotion once it was released. Hearing Meg's praise, Gloria's cheeks flushed, but her expression was still reserved. Mr. Meg's drawings are very accurate and detailed, and the tailors are also very skilled. That's why they can make such excellent clothes. Isn't a boss who can get these two things even better? Meg said with a smile. Gloria's face turned even redder. She bit her lips and didn't know what to say. When will this batch of down jackets hit the market? Meg did not continue to tease her and asked. The first batch is almost complete. After the manual inspection, they will be sent to the shop. However, there are only 50 pieces in the first batch, so they should be sold out soon, Gloria replied. Down jackets have a time limit. Try to produce as many batches as possible before the end of winter. Otherwise, we'll have to wait until next winter. Millimeter. Gloria nodded. The two of them suddenly fell into silence. Because the heater was on in the restaurant, Gloria unbuttoned her down jacket, but her cheeks were still a little pink. She looked at the teacup in front of her. The steam from the black tea was still rising. Where did Mr. Meg go for the past few days? Gloria looked up and asked Meg curiously. She had never been on a long journey before. She only knew about the world outside of Chaos City from books. She had never had the chance to experience it for herself. I went to the Goblins' Vic Mountain. I went all the way north and stopped outside the Wind Forest. I stayed in the mountain for a few days. Meg smiled. He felt a little apologetic. He had to keep his whereabouts a secret, so he could only lie to Gloria. Goblins. Gloria's eyes lit up, and she curiously asked, are their underground caverns really all connected? I've read in the books that there are underground caverns and caves all over Vic Mountain. Without the goblins leading the way, you'll get lost after entering, and you won't be able to find the exit. We didn't enter the underground caverns at Vic Mountain because we were worried about getting lost. However, we did see many underground caverns when we went north, and we even tried to explore them. Meg saw that Gloria was very interested, so he described to her what he saw and heard when he went to rescue the night elves. These were all things that he saw with his own eyes. Although there weren't any thrilling or interesting stories, Gloria still listened with great interest. She even looked at Meg with admiration shining in her eyes. She's really a good listener. Meg sighed in his heart. If he told her about this trip to the Demon Islands, he reckoned he would get a very good response. This is really a thrilling and interesting journey. Gloria couldn't help but praise Meg after hearing about his fictional journey. If Gloria wants to travel to the goblins' territory, it might become very convenient in the near future. Mag said with a smile as he looked at Gloria, who was looking forward to it. The railway to the goblins would be connected very soon, and it would be very convenient for them to take the steam locomotive to Vic Mountain from Chaos City. I've never traveled long distances alone before. A hint of hesitation appeared on Gloria's face. I don't recommend you to travel alone either. It's very dangerous for a beautiful lady like you to travel alone. Meg nodded. If she went out alone, she would probably be abducted as soon as she left Chaos City. After all, it was very rare to see such a beautiful lady with such a delicate body. This was ultimately a dangerous world. Gloria was silent for a while before she mustered her courage to look at Meg, and softly said, "Then, Mr. Meg, can you bring me along when you go out to collect materials next time? In that case, I won't be alone." Meg looked at Gloria in shock. He didn't expect her to make such a reasonable request. As a normal man, of course, he would accept a travel invitation from a single beautiful lady without hesitation. However, as a married man with children, Meg calmed himself down in the face of such an unreasonable request. He smiled casually, and said, "Sure. I'll ask Gloria to join us when we go out for a team-building trip next time." Everyone together? A hint of disappointment flashed past Gloria's eyes, but they lit up very quickly. She nodded with a smile, and said, "Millimeter. If Mr. Meg invites me, I'll definitely join." The morning tea ended with a pleasant chat. Meg sent Gloria off, and was about to enter when he saw a man in black standing in the corner. "Mr. Meg, the Lord of the Grey Temple would like to invite you over." The man in black passed a black token to Meg. There was the Grey Temple's symbol on it. Okay. Meg raised an eyebrow. Did Roland know something? However, he didn't show it on his face. He put away the token, and nodded slightly. He closed the door, hailed a horse-drawn carriage, and went directly to the street next to the Grey Temple's headquarters. After alighting from the carriage, he walked to the Grey Temple. It just so happened that he also wanted to know what changes had happened to this world after they wreaked havoc on the Demon Islands. No pop-up window. Chapter 1386. In the secret chamber of the Grey Temple, Roland and Michael were already waiting in advance. Seeing Meg enter, Michael stood up with a smile, and said, "Mr. Mac, your trip to collect materials has made the world a mess." Meg's eyes flickered slightly as he looked at the smiling Michael and the expressionless Roland. Did they really know something? However, his expression was still calm as he smiled, and said, "Did something happen in the past few days? You're quite good at pretending." The corner of Michael's mouth twitched slightly. The husband and wife had caused such a big incident, and they could still maintain such a standard of acting after returning. Alex had indeed changed. He was no longer the honest young man back then. Roland withdrew his gaze from Meg. From Meg's previous micro-expressions, he could already be sure that he was hiding his emotions. Don't ask him how he knew. If he didn't have this ability, he wouldn't have become the Lord of the Grey Temple. "Oh, you've just returned. I forgot that you're not aware of the situation. In the past few days when you were away, a few big things happened on the Demon Islands. The Demon Alliance, which was originally the strongest in the war, is now in complete chaos." Michael didn't make it clear, and smiled as he gestured for Meg to sit down. Irina and Alex made a move. They killed the Bar Hill, and the horror demons fell into temporary chaos. It's possible that they were the ones who instigated the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons. Within the vampires, there was an irreparable rift between the Barter family and the royal family because of the succession of the vampire ancestor. There were also many conflicts and disputes among the other demon clans. The war alliance formed previously only existed in name. I didn't expect that the demons that worried us were dealt with so easily. Alex and Princess Irina are really two great people. Meg said with a look of realization and surprise, but there was some suspicion in his eyes. How did Michael and the rest know that he and Irina were the ones who instigated the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons? Listen, is this what a human is saying? Who praises themselves like that? Michael pursed his lips slightly, but continued with a smile, "That's right, They've made very outstanding contributions to world peace. We're also preparing to formally meet them, and we're going to invite Mr. Meg to meet them with us." Meg raised his eyebrows. "Let him see him? Is this a test?" A hint of hesitation appeared in Meg's eyes as he looked at Michael. Even though he was sure that Chaos City and Michael were on the side that he trusted and was willing to stand on, he had to admit that everything that he had done had been perfectly planned. Therefore, he was still a little displeased that his plan had been seen through so easily. "It would be my honor to meet them." Meg smiled and nodded. "Well, Alex won't see you stupid mortals anyway." "Oh, yes. If the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons was instigated by Irina and Alex, will this bring trouble to Chaos City?" Meg asked after some thought. "We gave Irina and Alex an alibi on the night of the duel between Simmons and Alfred. Regarding the war between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons, apart from us, no one would suspect Irina and Alex," Roland explained. "I see." Meg's brows gradually relaxed. He didn't expect to have such an outstanding wingman. With Chaos City cleaning up after them, they didn't have to worry about causing trouble even if there were any loopholes in their plan. Because they weren't powerful enough, and their status was a little special, Chaos City should be the largest and most powerful in terms of the construction of their intelligence network. It could be seen from the confidential information that they had collected that their intelligence network had completely penetrated into the internal affairs of all the races and forces. The multiracial environment had created a special intelligence network that no single race could compare to. However, this also made Meg suspect that Michael and Roland might have already guessed his identity, or at least suspected him. However, since they didn't say it out loud, and even help to clean up the mess, Meg naturally wouldn't jump out and admit it. This kind of feeling was also quite good. Everyone was well aware of it. If they didn't make it clear, they could still chat as they pleased. If there was any information that they wanted to disclose, they could also communicate through normal channels. It wouldn't affect their normal lives. This is the intelligence that the Grey Temple received from the various races recently, as well as some confidential documents that were previously made available to you. If you're interested, you can take a look at them. Roland took out a black wooden box from under the table and pushed it in front of Meg gently. "I'm very interested." Mag placed his hand on the box, and his eyes lit up. First-hand information was exactly what he needed. Furthermore, what came as a surprise to him was that Michael and Roland had given him a higher level of authority, and had even given him confidential documents. After this incident, the demons shouldn't be able to form a unified voice in the racial peace talks. The threat of war has been temporarily removed. Michael looked at Meg with a smile, and said, "Mr. Meg, which race's problem do you think we should solve next?" Meg looked at Michael, and pondered for a while before saying, "I think it should be the Orcs." The August tribe helped Gary to rebel and control the peace-loving Fork tribe, and made the Orcs a powerful race that was led by the pro-war voices. However, the internal suppression of the Fork tribe hasn't been completed yet. Gary hasn't been able to control the tribe well, and the princess of the Fork tribe is wandering outside. This might be a breakthrough point for us to break the Orcs' main battle line. This is indeed a very good breakthrough point. However, we still haven't been able to find Princess Connie of the Fork tribe. Moreover, Gary has basically completed the bloody suppression, and wiped out many Orcs who were loyal to the former chief. He is gradually controlling the Fork tribe, Roland said with a frown. As the Kingslayer, Gary doesn't have the right to do so. Even if he uses the bloody suppression to temporarily control the Fork tribe, this method will only cause more chaos at the right time. Meg shook his head with a smile. "Moreover, I know where Princess Connie is." "Oh." Michael and Roland looked surprised at the same time. This was indeed out of their expectations. Meg shrugged, and explained, "I saved an Orc girl who was being hunted down previously. I only found out that she was Princess Connie after that. She is now working as a salted fish delivery person in my restaurant. She is learning from the deputy warden of the Bastille prison, the Hairless Monk, and is working hard to become a killer without a sense of direction." Michael's lips twitched, and he said with a weird expression, "Mr. Mac, you are really a princess harvester." Chapter 1387. City Lord, don't spout nonsense. Although the princess is good, you can't drink too much, Meg quickly said seriously. God knew that even the service staff he picked up was a princess. There were even some who came from the heavens, and some who weren't princesses at first, but became princesses later on. He couldn't count them in detail. He couldn't count them anymore. Meg then chatted with Michael and the rest about the construction of the railway to Vic Mountain. The first phase of the 200-kilometer railway had been completed, and connected Chaos City to Tatari, an important town in the south of the Goblins. The construction and debugging of the locomotive were also basically completed. He planned to invite Meg to the base for the final trial run to ensure that it could enter the trial run stage as soon as possible. After the conversation ended, Meg bade farewell and prepared to leave. Michael went out with Meg and curiously asked, "Mr. Mac, you've been out collecting materials for so many days. What new product are you preparing to launch today?" "Crayfish," Meg replied with a smile. "Sounds like a pretty good seafood," Michael said with a smile. "Yes. I've put in a lot of effort to get this crayfish." Meg nodded in agreement. Perhaps the chaos on the Demon Islands this time could be renamed as the War of the Crayfish. "I must go and try it when I have time," Michael said in advance. "Anytime." Meg nodded with a smile. Meg left the Grey Temple's side door with the wooden box. He only flagged down a horse-drawn carriage when he reached the street next door. This long conversation lasted for 2 hours. He had to rush back to the restaurant to prepare for the lunch service. The horse-drawn carriage turned into the long street. Meg was about to put down the curtains when he suddenly noticed Raina, who was supporting an old lady by the side of the street. He quickly got the coachman to stop the carriage by the side. "Raina," Meg called out to Raina as he lifted the curtains. Raina looked around before noticing Meg, who was sitting in the carriage. Her eyes lit up, and she asked, "Boss, why are you here?" "I came out to do something and happened to see you," Meg said with a smile, and then his eyes fell on the old lady, or rather, a middle-aged woman, who was supported by Raina. However, because she was very thin, her hair was half white, and she wore a cotton coat full of patches. Her hunched figure made her look like an old woman in her twilight years. Her face was sickly pale, and her appearance was somewhat similar to Raina. He quickly said, "Hello, you must be Raina's mother." "Mother, this is my boss, Mr. Meg." Raina hurriedly introduced. "Hello, Mr. Meg. Thank you very much for taking care of Raina. She often talks about you." Karen's looked at Meg with a gentle smile. Although the smile was a little difficult, it still made people feel warm. Raina is a very good employee. Her ability is very good and outstanding. "I should thank you for cultivating such an excellent daughter," Meg said modestly, and then said, "Do you live nearby?" "No, we live in the north of the city. Today, I brought my mother to see a doctor. Now, I am going to send her home, and then I will immediately rush to the restaurant." Raina shook her head and said apologetically, "I may be late, but I will try my best to run over." "Raina, you don't have to send me. I can walk back slowly. You should hurry to work. Don't delay the restaurant's business." Karen's let go of Raina's hand and said somewhat sternly, "But mother, your body." Raina looked at Karen's with a worried face. "The doctor said there is no big problem. You can go to work without worry." Karen's interrupted Raina's words with a firm tone. "Actually, I am not here to urge you to go to work." Meg was a little flustered in his heart. Why did he suddenly feel that he had become an unscrupulous boss? However, poverty did not make Raina bad. It was probably because of such a family education. "Madam, get in the car. I will send you home." Meg got out of the car and looked at Karen's with a smile. "How can this be? Mr. Meg is so busy. You can't waste time on a useless person like me." Karen's quickly shook her head. "If I don't send you home, Raina will definitely be very worried about you. Then, you can't work well." Meg looked at Karen's with a smile and said softly, "The carriage will send you home soon. We will go to the restaurant together. It won't take much time." "Boss." Raina looked at Meg. Her eyes were slightly red. "This." Karen's looked at Raina and then looked at Meg. She was a little hesitant. "Madam, get in the car. It is rare to meet such a kind boss." The coachman had already helped to move the wooden ladder down and said with a smile, "Then, I will trouble you." Karen's was afraid that she would waste Meg's time if she continued to delay. She thanked him and slowly got into the carriage with Raina's help. Meg also climbed into the carriage again. He put down the curtain and immediately isolated the cold air outside. "Raina, tell the coachman the address," Meg said to Raina. "Okay." Raina nodded. She lifted the curtain and told the coachman the address. The carriage then turned around and headed to the north of the city. "I am really sorry for the trouble." Karen's looked at Meg sitting opposite her. She was still a little embarrassed. "You are an elder. This small matter is what I should do. If I knew that Raina would accompany you to see a doctor today, I definitely wouldn't let her come to work today." Meg hurriedly comforted her. He did blame himself for the negligence of his employee's life. Karen still wanted to say something. Suddenly, she covered her mouth with a handkerchief and coughed violently. Raina quickly stroked Karen's back. Her eyes were full of worry. Mag looked at Clarence, who was coughing so hard that her face was red. It seemed that she was in great pain every time she coughed. His brows furrowed slightly. It seemed like Clarence's condition wasn't as simple as she had said. After a while, Karen stopped coughing. Meg still saw a trace of blood on the handkerchief in her hand. "I am sorry to let you sit in the same carriage as me." Karen's looked at Meg apologetically. She didn't know where to put her hands because of nervousness. "Your words make me a little scared. You are Raina's mother, which means you are my elder. I hope I didn't burden you," Meg said apologetically. Karen's looked at Meg and smiled. "You are a true gentleman. I am very happy that Raina can meet a boss like you." The carriage stopped, and Meg and Raina helped Karen's out of the carriage. Meg's heart sank when he saw the shabby and leaky building in the slums. For a patient, living in such a place would make her condition worse. Furthermore, the restaurant was almost across the entire Chaos City. It was hard to imagine how long Raina had to walk to the restaurant every morning and walk back here alone after she finished her morning work. Although Chaos City was safe, the slums at night were still very dangerous for a young girl. "Raina, you and your mother can move to the staff dormitory. I have prepared a dormitory for you," Meg said to Raina, who was sitting opposite him, on the carriage. Daddy's Otherworldly Restaurant. Daddy's Otherworldly Restaurant. Chapter 1388. Raina stared blankly at Meg for a moment, then quickly waved her hand and said, No need, boss. It's fine if we live here. When the next month's salary is paid, I can bring my mother and rent a new place." She knew that Mia and the others lived in the dormitory that Meg provided for them, but she had her mother with her. If she lived with them, they would definitely feel uncomfortable. She still had to brew medicine for her mother. The staff dormitory is one of the employee benefits. This is what you should enjoy. Considering that you live with your mother, I will arrange a small suite for you. This way, it will be more convenient for you. Meg looked at Raina with a smile and said in an unquestionable tone, "If you refuse, I will feel that I am not a good boss." Raina looked at Meg and slightly opened her mouth. Looking at that gentle smile, it was as if the softest part of her heart had been touched. She nodded lightly and said, "Thank you very much. After the lunch service, I will call a carriage for you to pick up your mother. The dormitory is very complete. You only need to bring the important things," Meg said with a smile. Raina was a girl with a sensitive heart, so he planned to give her and her mother a cozy suite. It would not inconvenience the lives of young girls like Mia and the others. "Okay." Raina nodded and secretly made up her mind to work hard and repay the boss. When they passed by the ice cream shop on the way back, Meg stopped the carriage and paid the coachman. He took Raina to the back of the ice cream shop and went up the stairs to the second floor. There was another door beside the original staff dormitory. "This is your and your mother's residence. This is Mia's dormitory. In the future, you will be neighbors, so it will be more convenient for you to visit each other." Meg took out the key and opened the door. It was a small suite of about 40 square meters. The layout was relatively compact, but it was very complete with a kitchen, dining room, living room, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. The beige decoration style made the house look warm. Without the fancy decorations, the minimalist style made the limited space to the maximum. Visually, it didn't make people feel narrow and crowded. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room made the room very bright. There was a vase on the small dining table for 2 with a bouquet of carnations. Raina stood at the door and looked at the luxurious room in her eyes. She stopped. "Don't you want to come in and take a look?" Meg looked back at Raina, who was still standing at the door, and asked with a smile. "Boss, I think it's too luxurious. I can't live in such a luxurious place." Raina shook her head and said with some hesitation, "Our restaurant staff dormitories are all of this standard. You have contributed delicious food and excellent service to the guests and earned a very high income for the restaurant. This is what you deserve," Meg said with a smile. He walked to the door and directly pulled Raina's wrist into the room. "You may not have lived in such a strange house, so there are some things I have to explain to you first. This is the kitchen. The standard of the stove is a miniature version of the restaurant's current one. The knives are here, the tableware is in the cabinet below, and this is the condiment box. Also, this thing is called a fridge. If there's anything that you haven't finished eating or something that needs to be preserved at a low temperature, you can put it in the fridge to keep it fresh. This will be very useful in summer." Mag brought Rena around the house and explained to her how to use all the electrical appliances and things that she needed to take note of. Rena memorized everything Meg said, but still looked around with surprise. She sighed in her heart. "So this is how the rich people's house looks like. But why have I never seen these things before? Even in the previous boss's house, I've never seen these things before. It's about time. We should go back to the restaurant." Meg raised his hand to look at his watch. It was already 10:30 p.m. If they didn't go back now, the lunch service would be affected. After all, it was the first day of their return. After the news in the morning was released, there would probably be many customers at noon. Sure enough, before Meg reached the restaurant, he already saw a long line in front of the restaurant. There's still an hour before the restaurant opens. There are already so many customers in line. Raina was also a little surprised to see the dozens of customers who had already lined up in an orderly manner. "This is probably the charm of the new product," Meg said with a smile. He walked to the entrance of the restaurant and saw many familiar faces in the line. For example, Gyurj was in the line today with his family. Miranda was holding their 1-month-old daughter, while Gyurj was holding Angus in one hand and Parba in the other. He could be considered a full-fledged stay-at-home dad. Meg looked at the big family with a smile and said, "Will Palmer be sad if he finds out that you left him here for lunch?" "It's all right. I've already told him to come to the school gate after school. The coachman will send him to the restaurant. Mr. Mack is launching a new product today, so we definitely have to come and support him," Gyurj said with a smile. "Thank you for coming, then." Meg smiled as he gently stroked the face of the little princess in Miranda's arms. The little girl was sleeping soundly. Amy would definitely like to see her later. A few days ago, she had even told her that she was going to see Palmer's little sister. "Mr. Mack, we're coming too." Vanessa waved at Meg. Abraham looked at Meg with a hint of resentment and said, "Mr. Mack, everything I ate tasted bland when you weren't around." "Is that so? I heard that the Duke had been eating hot pot for a few days." Meg didn't believe him. Ahem, of course hot pot is the first choice. After all, in Chaos City, only your new chef, Miss Raina, can make something that's on par with Mr. Max. Abraham coughed awkwardly and didn't forget to give Raina a thumbs up. Raina blushed, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. Raina is indeed an excellent chef. Meg nodded with a smile. He liked employees who could take charge of things on their own. This gave him the opportunity to be a hands-off boss. "Mr. Mack, look, my teeth are much better now. Can I start eating spicy hot pot now?" Vanessa asked Meg with her teeth bared. Meg looked at Vanessa's teeth. Compared to before, the black color had indeed decreased a lot. Some areas had already regained their white color. If she kept her teeth a little, It wouldn't affect her beauty anymore. Eat clear soup hot pot for a while more. After the black color is removed, it's time to fill the holes. It won't be too late for you to eat spicy hot pot when your teeth are completely healed. Meg shook his head. He had almost forgotten about the mission to repair Vanessa's teeth. Although he was in awe of the durian pizza, which was a dark cuisine, he didn't want to face the punishment for failing the mission. Chapter 1389. Do I still need to eat for a while longer? Vanessa was discouraged. She thought that she would be free after Mr. Meg came back, but she still couldn't eat. Meg thought for a while and said, "Come to the restaurant at around 2 o'clock today. I'll call 2 experts to evaluate your teeth and see if there's a way to fix them." Okay. Vanessa's eyes lit up. The people who were called experts by Mr. Mack must be very capable. Maybe they could fix her teeth in an instant. Then she would be able to eat everything. Meg greeted the regulars and led Raina into the restaurant. In the kitchen, Phyllis and Camilla had already started to prepare the ingredients needed for lunch. The two of them had different styles of cutting vegetables, but they were equally efficient. There were already piles of ingredients by the side, and they could use them directly when cooking later. Meg went upstairs and changed into a clean chef's uniform. He put on an apron, washed his hands, and started making the tofu pudding. He had to make tofu pudding for 400 people this afternoon. The workload was a little higher than usual, but it was just an increase. It wasn't a big problem. Rena was looking at Mag seriously at the side. She could clearly feel those women's fanatical love for tofu pudding these few days. She liked tofu pudding too. Not only was it delicious, but it also had a very good restorative effect on the skin. Meg saw that Rena was looking at him seriously, so he explained as he cooked. The process of making tofu pudding seems complicated, but it's actually not difficult after mastering it. You just have to grasp the right timing. Not long after, MIA and the others also came to the restaurant. MIA walked to the entrance of the restaurant and looked at Meg curiously. "Boss, what's the new dish you're launching today? Can you reveal it now?" "The new dish we're launching today is braised crayfish. Sit down and wait for lunch." "We'll have this dish for lunch," Meg said with a smile. Braised crayfish? Everyone was a little confused, but more than that, they were looking forward to it. After all, they never understood how the boss named the dishes. "Then I want to eat too. 2 big prawns." Amy had just come back from school. She ran up and raised her little hand. "Okay." Meg nodded and grabbed a few crayfish from the fish tank in the corner. The crayfish that the system supplied directly from the breeding base were obviously much cleaner than the ones caught by the fishermen. There was no sand or stains at all. After washing them with clean water, they could be cooked directly. What a big crayfish. The girls looked at the 1 kilogram crayfish in Meg's hand and were surprised. Compared to the prawns used to make Yeongju fried rice, this crayfish was huge. "Is this a shrimp caught from the sea?" "It has the aura of the ocean," Gina asked curiously. "Yes, crayfish that grow in the sea." Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up the fat head fish from the knife rack and began to cut open the back of the crayfish to remove its veins. The expansion of the designated hot pot area last time had doubled the size of the kitchen. There was a lot of empty space. Therefore, it didn't seem crowded even when 3 big pots were set up in the kitchen. Meg decided to postpone the release of the 3 crayfish flavors that were released in the Demon Islands. If the flavors were too similar, it would be equivalent to self-destruction. Luckily, he still had 3 crayfish flavors that he could make now. He planned to release the braised crayfish at noon, steamed crayfish, and chilled crayfish later. He would consider releasing the ma xiao, minced garlic, and 13 spices after the Demon Islands incident was over. The braising technique of the braised crayfish would determine if the crayfish dish could reach the standard of deliciousness. The processed crayfish was set aside. The rapeseed oil was poured into the hot pot. When the oil was 70% hot, the spices were added. After stirring slightly, the fragrance of the spices began to spread. At this time, the processed crayfish was poured in and stirred quickly. The greenish-black shell of the crayfish gradually turned red and a faint fragrance began to spread. At this time, the beer was poured into the crayfish. Without adding a drop of water, he quickly covered the pot with the lid and started to braise. The braising process was to allow the spices to penetrate the crayfish meat perfectly. This process took a very long time. When the gravy was almost completely absorbed, the pot lid was removed. The fresh fragrance instantly bloomed like a delicacy bomb exploding in the kitchen and gushing out. It smells so good. The eyes of the customers who were waiting for lunch lit up one after another. The fresh fragrance that could be smelled was a wonderful fragrance that was hard to resist. Meg shook the big pot lightly and let the gravy at the bottom of the pot dry completely. Only then did he ladle the crayfish into the pot. The crayfish were ladled onto the plate one by one. Unlike the spicy crayfish that was wrapped in the red soup oil, the braised crayfish had a rather dry appearance. The spices on the back of the crayfish were painted with wonderful colors, and the plump crayfish meat made people drool. "This is our lunch today." Meg ladled the last crayfish onto the plate and said with a smile, "I can't wait to try it. I think it will be a wonderful taste," Mia said with a look of anticipation. Barbara waved her small hand, and the plates with the crayfish floated up one by one and gently landed on the large hotpot table next door. Irina just happened to come back. She walked to the table and took a look. She was a little surprised and said, "This crayfish, did they change the cooking method again?" "Yes. Today's dish is braised crayfish. Wash your hands and we can start eating." Meg nodded and gestured for everyone to sit down and eat. Meg sat down and looked at the table full of people. Unknowingly, Amy's had become a big family. The entire table was filled to the brim, and aside from Sally, everyone was present. "I'm going to start eating," Amy said. Then, she grabbed a pincer as big as her little hand and sucked a little of the gravy in the gap. Then, she forcefully pried open the shell of the pincer, which had been cracked in advance. The plump crayfish meat, which was stained red by the gravy, was easily taken out. Amy opened her mouth wide and took a big bite. Her big blue eyes suddenly lit up, and she happily chewed on the crayfish meat. The crayfish meat filled with gravy made a soft chewing sound, as if it was accompanied by a beautiful movement. Gulp. Everyone subconsciously swallowed their saliva. Amy's eating was really too delicious. Watching her eat was a kind of enjoyment and also a kind of torture. Fortunately, there was also a crayfish in front of them. Amy swallowed the crayfish meat in her mouth, then looked at Meg and said, "This big crayfish is so delicious. After eating this one, I want to eat another one." "Okay, I'll keep it for you. You can eat it later and show it to the uncles and aunties waiting in line outside." Meg nodded with a smile. When new things appeared, there was always a need for an expert. As an excellent food taster, Amy was the perfect person to show the customers how to elegantly eat a crayfish. Chapter 1390. After waiting for so many days, Mr. Mac is finally back. I'm really looking forward to the new product he's launching today. Didn't anyone get any news from Mr. Meg in advance? What's the new product he's launching this time? There's no announcement, and he didn't reveal the name of the dish in advance. Mr. Mac has kept it very mysterious this time. There was already a long line of customers at the entrance, which extended all the way to the park. The customers were all discussing the new product with curiosity. "What I'm most concerned about is if I can still eat the tofu pudding at this position," a lady at the end of the line said worriedly. "No problem. Mr. Meg said that from today onwards, he will provide 400 servings of tofu pudding for every meal. You happen to be number 399, the lady in front of her said with a smile. "That's great." That lady's eyes lit up. Being able to eat the tofu pudding was more important than anything else. Meanwhile, the ladies behind her became nervous. They could only pray that not every man in front of them ordered a serving of tofu pudding. As for the ladies, if it wasn't for this tofu pudding that could beautify one's looks, not many ladies would be willing to wait in line for such a long time. Ding-ling. The bell on the restaurant's door rang. The customers all looked over in surprise. It wasn't opening hours yet, was it? Mia walked out with a stool and a small stool in her hands. She placed them in front of the restaurant's door one after the other, and then returned to the restaurant without saying a word. The customers were all puzzled. They didn't know what Miss MIA was doing. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door was pushed open again. Amy walked out with a big plate in her hands. She placed the plate on the stool, and then sat on the small stool. Ugly Duckling followed her out and sat beside Amy, looking up at the plate. What a big prawn! The customers' gazes were all attracted by the big prawn on Amy's plate. The bright red crayfish was bigger than Amy's head. Even the two big pincers were bigger than Amy's palms. They had never seen such a huge prawn in Chaos City. Could this be Mr. Mac's new product? So, is Little Boss's new product tasting session coming again? In order to promote the new product, Mr. Mac is becoming more and more unscrupulous. His behavior is simply indecent. The customers were whispering, but there was no anger on their faces. Instead, they were looking at Amy expectantly. Although this had become a regular feature of the launch of a new product, they still enjoyed watching the little boss eat. Look, what a big prawn! Amy grabbed the crayfish on the plate with both hands and raised it high to show everyone how domineering the crayfish was. Gulp! Just looking at the bright red prawns, some customers couldn't help but swallow their saliva. As for the customers standing in the front row, they had to endure the invasion of the fragrance. The fresh fragrance slowly drifted over, making them feel as if they had smelled the scent of the sea. Crassus's and Julian's throats moved at the same time. They looked at each other and snorted at the same time, continuing to act like experts. Then, I'll start eating. Amy put down the crayfish and twisted off one of the pincers as usual. She peeled off the shell skillfully with her little hands, and then showed the plump pincer meat to everyone. Amy opened her mouth wide and took a big bite of the crayfish meat. Her cheeks were puffed up, and the soft sounds of chewing could be heard, perfectly displaying the tenderness and crispness of the crayfish meat. The blissful smile on her little face, and the habitual swaying of her upper body from side to side, made the customers swallow their saliva uncontrollably. A plump pincer was quickly eaten by Amy. She reached out to twist off the crayfish's head, and showed everyone the crayfish's brain that was full of crayfish butter. She picked up the long spoon at the edge of the plate, and scooped out a whole spoonful of crayfish butter from the crayfish's brain. She mumbled to herself, "Stupid crayfish, I'm going to eat your brain." After saying that, she put the whole spoonful of crayfish butter into her mouth. The delicious crayfish butter made Amy close her eyes involuntarily. She felt the crayfish butter melt in her mouth, as if it was jumping on the tip of her tongue. After swallowing, she sighed softly, opened her eyes again, and scooped out another spoonful of crayfish butter to put into her mouth. Who am I? Why do I have to suffer such torture here? A customer standing in the front row said with a hopeless expression. Mr. Mac is too much, isn't he? Didn't he promise not to use Little Boss first? Harrison swallowed his saliva violently. Looking at the remaining crayfish on Amy's plate, he had some ideas. After scooping out the crayfish's brain, Amy didn't forget to take a bite. Only then did she grab the crayfish, and with a gentle force from the opening, the shell and the meat were perfectly separated. The meat, which was as thick as her arm, was peeled off just like that. The plump meat was soaked in the gravy and turned into a golden red color. There was a hint of oil on it, but it didn't look greasy at all. The entrance of the restaurant gradually quieted down. The customers looked at the crayfish meat in Amy's hand, and everyone knew that the main event was coming. Amy held the crayfish meat with both hands as if she was holding a breadstick. She put it to her mouth and took a big bite, then chewed happily. Although they didn't taste it with their own mouths, the customers could already feel the feeling of the crayfish meat blooming in their mouths. That wonderful taste, that incredible chewing feeling, they were already salivating uncontrollably. Even that dignified noblewoman couldn't help but swallow. Harrison touched his growling stomach and coughed softly, intending to say something. Little Amy, is this crayfish meat delicious? Crassus beat him to it with a smile. Hey, sir, are you stealing my line? Harrison glared, but after taking a look at this sir, he was indeed a real sir. He swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Master Crassus, do you want to know? Amy swallowed the crayfish meat in her mouth, looked up at Crassus, and asked. Crassus coughed softly and said calmly, "Actually, I don't really want to know, but if it's little Amy, you must let me try, smell it. It's super fragrant." Amy stood up and put the crayfish meat in her hand in front of Crassus for a while. Then, she took it back and sat back on the stool. She looked at him and asked, "Do you smell it?" Crassus's expression froze, but when he looked at Amy's innocent expression, he couldn't help but squeeze out a smile. He nodded and said, "It smells really good." What could he do? This was his disciple. He was the one who asked the question, and his answer was so impeccable. Heh! Julian laughed mercilessly. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Luckily, he held back. Chapter 1391. No matter what this crayfish is called, I'm going to eat it for lunch today. I have to admit that Mr. Mac is indeed a top chef and a marketing genius. He has successfully attracted my attention to this crayfish. Looks like this crayfish and beer will go well together. The customers' expectations were completely stirred up by Amy. They watched Amy eat the crayfish while waiting for the restaurant to officially open for business. "Boss, you're so naughty." MIA couldn't help but laugh at the anxious customers. "Looks like the crayfish will become another best-selling delicacy in the restaurant without much introduction and promotion," Shirley said with a smile. "The crayfish is so delicious. The customers will definitely like it," Gina said softly. Although she had lived in the sea since she was young, she had never eaten such delicious crayfish. She didn't know where Mr. Meg found this kind of crayfish. "How can you say that it's naughty? I just asked Amy to explain it to them. Otherwise, the customers who see the crayfish for the first time will have trouble eating it," Meg said seriously. It was rare to see such a considerate boss like him. 1,000 copper coins for one crayfish? Irina picked up a menu and looked at the price of the crayfish. She looked at Meg in surprise. The price of a product is not only determined by its value, but also by its rarity. It also has the characteristic of having a high premium. Meg said calmly. The price of a crayfish from the system was 100 copper coins per crayfish. Although his price of 1,000 copper coins was a little overpriced, it wasn't a big problem. After all, this was a crayfish that weighed 1 kilogram. Ordinary people would be full after eating one crayfish. Even the Australian crayfish in his previous life cost more than 600 copper coins to buy alive. After processing it with his superb culinary skills, was 1,000 copper coins expensive? It was indeed a little expensive. Who would pay 1,000 copper coins for a crayfish? Get ready. We're going to open for business soon. Meg looked at the clock on the wall. There were still 5 minutes before the restaurant's official business hours. Jane walked up and whispered to Meg, "Boss, what should I do for lunch?" The restaurant was so busy, and she wanted to help out. Otherwise, she would feel like an idler if she only helped out occasionally. Meg thought for a while and said, "Jane, you'll be in charge of helping Anna collect money at noon. She'll be very busy at noon, and collecting money is very important. Anna won't be able to do it alone." "Yes," Jane replied. Anna looked at Jane and smiled. "Then, big sister Jane, I'll leave it to you." Jane also nodded with a smile. Anna was small, but she was very good at calculating. However, the restaurant was so busy. She had to calculate, collect, and give the change. It was indeed a little too busy. She could help share some of the burden. Let's start. Meg tidied up his chef's uniform. After confirming that there were no problems, he reached out and opened the door to the restaurant. Looking at the hundreds of customers lined up outside, he smiled and said, "Welcome to Amy's." The customers looked at Meg standing upright at the door and the open door of the restaurant. They suddenly felt as if the clouds had cleared and the sun had finally come out. The door was finally open. Amy also finished eating the last pincer. She looked up at Meg with a satisfied smile and said, "Father, I've finished eating. I'm so full." "Well, Amy, you're really enjoying it." Meg smiled dotingly and touched Amy's head. Every time he saw the little girl's happy and satisfied smile when she ate, he felt a great sense of accomplishment. Money could no longer move him. Amy was the strongest motivation for him to continue on the path of becoming the god of cookery. He had promised her that he would make a big table of Manchu Han imperial feast for her. Before this small goal was achieved, of course, he would not give up easily. The customers entered the restaurant in order. Meg smiled and responded to the customers who took the initiative to greet him. He could remember the name of every customer, which was probably the reason why the customers were willing to come here often. Is this the braised crayfish that little boss ate just now? 1,000 copper coins for one. It's a little expensive. The customers took their seats, and soon noticed the additional crayfish dish on the menu, as well as the price at the back. Many customers immediately dismissed the idea of trying it. 1,000 copper coins was not a small amount. It was enough to eat a few rugiamos and tofu puddings. I think the price is quite reasonable. One crayfish is enough to fill our stomachs. With a glass of beer, it should be a very interesting combination, Harrison said with a smile after taking a look at the menu at the table with Gyurge's family. I agree with your pairing. Gyurge nodded in agreement. He then looked at Miranda and the children, and asked, what would you like to eat? I also want a crayfish. Palmer raised his hand. Parber raised his little hand, and repeated, ice cream. I want ice cream. Parber, you can't eat ice cream before dinner. Miranda took back Parber's hand, and said, I also want to try that crayfish. Little Amy seems to be enjoying it very much. I'm curious what it tastes like. Parber and Angus can eat with me. Anyway, the crayfish is so big. I can't finish it. Okay. Gyurge nodded. MIA happened to come over, so they ordered 4 crayfish, 2 glasses of beer, and 6 tofu puddings. Angus, can we eat the tofu pudding now? After ordering, Harrison looked at Angus, who was focused on biting his finger, in surprise. Mr. Mack said we can eat a little, but the children can't eat too much, Gyurge said with a smile. The children's usefulness is fully displayed at this moment. Harrison sighed. The little one in Miranda's arms was biting on a cork pacifier, and looking around curiously with her big eyes. This was the first time she was brought out. Hello, little Christy. Amy walked up and stood on her tiptoes to look at the baby in Miranda's arms, and greeted her with a smile. Yap, yap. The little one's eyes fell on Amy's face, and her big round eyes lit up. The cork pacifier fell out, and she opened her little arms to Amy as if she wanted to be hugged. Do you want a hug? I really don't know what to do with you. Amy sighed, and looked at Miranda. Auntie Miranda, can I hug little sister? Of course. Miranda nodded with a smile, and handed Christy carefully to Amy. She smiled, and said, Christy won't even take the initiative to ask for a hug from her father. I didn't expect her to be so proactive with little Amy. Because I'm a pretty big sister. Amy hugged Christy, and gently kissed her cheek. Christy immediately smiled happily. I also want a kiss and a hug from pretty big sister. Parber stood up from the chair, and opened his arms to Amy with a pout. But I don't want to. Amy looked at him, and rejected him seriously. Chapter 1392. Parber raised his hands in a daze. Then, his little face scrunched up, and he burst into tears. As he cried, he sobbed, Why can't I be a cute little sister? I want to be a cute little sister. Gyurge apologized to the customers beside him awkwardly as he carried Parber with a dark expression, and consoled him. Don't cry, Parber. Let father hug you. Father, I want to be a little sister too. Parber snuggled in Gyurge's arms, and gradually stopped crying. He felt wronged and expectant. It's useless. Even if you become a little sister, you'll still be rejected because you're not cute enough, Palmer analyzed calmly. Yeah. Look at how cute Christy is. She's so pink and tender, just like a little elf. Amy nodded as she teased Christy with a funny face. Whoa, no. I want to be cute too. I want a big sister to hug me too. Parber, who had just rested, couldn't help but cry again. There were tears on his face, and he was extremely sad. I'll bring the child out to play for a while. Let's go first, Gyurge said to Miranda helplessly. He was at his wits' end now. The little boss simply didn't give him a chance to coax the child. If the child made a ruckus, it would affect the other customers' meals. That wasn't good. Let me see. Which little cutie wants a hug? Right at this moment, a gentle voice sounded, and a colorful bubble floated over. There was a colorful fish swimming happily in the bubble, and it stopped in front of Paba. Paba's attention was instantly attracted by the bubble fish. His eyes widened, and he stared at the bubble in disbelief. Little cutie, let big sister hug you, okay? Big sister will bring you to see the fish that can fly. Gina walked up and blew gently at the bubble. The bubble with the fish wrapped in it immediately spun around Paba's head. She looked at Paba and said gently, "Don't worry about it. Millimeter. Paba's attention was completely attracted by the bubble and the fish. On top of that, this big sister looked super gentle. He nodded without thinking, and allowed Gina to carry him. "I'll play with the child for a while. Please have a meal," Gina said to Gyurj with a smile. She carried Paba and chased the bubble to the children's play area. In the small play area, there were already 5 or 6 children playing with the bubble fish. They didn't cry or make a fuss, and many parents felt relieved. Luckily, there's Miss Gina. Gyurj heaved a sigh of relief. She could always make the crying children quiet for a second. "Christy," Miranda said, "Miss, Amos," and Gina said, "Gina, Amy's eyes." Amy's eyes also lit up. She greeted Miranda and carried Chris to the children's area. Gina, 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 Gina into SS. Gina S Gina S Gina, Gina Ina, Gina 2, Gina, Gled, Gina Gina. Little Amy is such a kind-hearted child. Miranda looked at this scene with a smile. Yes, little boss is a little angel. Although she's a little straightforward with Paba, she's as kind as Mr. Mac. Gyurj nodded with a smile. He didn't take Paba's crying to heart at all. Little angel. Palmer rested his chin on one hand, and looked at Amy's back thoughtfully. The customers ordered their food one after another. Those who could accept the price of 1,000 copper coins per crayfish ordered one without hesitation. After all, Mr. Mac went out to collect ingredients for 5 days to create this dish. They were already looking forward to it when they saw Little Boss try it. "Your crayfish." Mia came out with a big tray, and placed 4 servings of crayfish in front of Vanessa, Abraham, and the other 3. Although Randy came a little late, he was still able to share a table with them. "Wow, this crayfish is really huge. Its head is even bigger than my palm," Vanessa exclaimed as she compared it with her hand. Randy sized up the huge crayfish in front of him, and said, "Only the sea can produce such huge crayfish. Once it leaves the sea, it will die very quickly. I wonder how Mr. Mac managed to transport this crayfish to Chaos City in such a perfect condition. If it's chilled, it would have to be transported by a flying steed to maintain its texture. Just the transportation cost alone is extremely expensive, and there's no way to prevent it from dying on the way. I've never seen Mr. Mac use ingredients that aren't fresh. We'll know if it's still alive after we try it," Abraham said with a smile. He reached out and broke off a pincer like how Amy ate it earlier. The surface of the crayfish shell was rather dry, and there were already cracks on the hard shell. He easily peeled off the shell without much effort, and revealed the meat that was filled with pincers. The toughness of the crayfish meat is not bad. It's not like those crayfish that were frozen in ice for a long time before being melted, Abraham said as he looked at the firm pincers before taking a bite of the meat. Abraham's eyes immediately lit up as he bit into the soft and plump prawn meat. A delicious flavor instantly blossomed, and the flavors of all types of spices had already seeped into the meat. The long period of cooking had absorbed all of the essence of the spices into the prawn meat. Compared to the dry prawn shell, the prawn meat was filled with juices and carried with it a hint of the wonderful aroma of wine. The slightly spicy texture didn't cover up the freshness of the crayfish meat at all. He could even feel the tender and chewy texture when he bit into the meat. It was a beautiful movement that made his scalp tingle. As someone who had gone to the Demon Islands as a representative of the Roth Empire, he had tasted the mantis prawns that were just caught from the sea and cooked immediately. The fresh taste and texture were unforgettable. However, compared to this crayfish, The king mantis prawn that Master Tony called the best prawn on the Demon Islands lost without a doubt. Whether it was the freshness of the crayfish meat, the chewy texture, or the scrumptiousness brought about by the amazing culinary skills, the braised crayfish made by Mr. Mac completely crushed that king mantis prawn. I can guarantee with my reputation that this is definitely cooked with fresh, live crayfish. Abraham swallowed the crayfish meat in his mouth, and seriously said, "Furthermore, this is the most delicious crayfish I've ever eaten. There's no other." Oh! Randy was a little surprised. After this period of interaction, he knew that Abraham's knowledge in food was not inferior to his. However, he still didn't believe that Meg could bring the crayfish back to Chaos City alive. He couldn't imagine the cost. He twisted the crayfish's head off, and looked at the crayfish roe. The fresh aroma wafted over. He scooped up a spoonful of crayfish roe. The crayfish roe was very plump, and there wasn't any fishy smell of seafood. This was indeed very different from the frozen crayfish he had eaten in Chaos City. Chapter 1393. Randy put a spoonful of crayfish butter into his mouth. Freshness and fragrance were the first reactions his taste buds got. He only took a light sip, and it melted in his mouth. It was indeed the freshness that belonged to the sea. He had also gone to the Demon Islands before, and stayed on that nameless island for a period of time. If it wasn't for the fact that his relationship with that demon lady was accidentally leaked, and her drunkard husband was looking for him everywhere with a knife, he might have stayed there for a period of time. However, the taste of the sea was unforgettable. The fish and prawns caught from the sea were the best gift from nature. They didn't even need any seasoning. They only needed to be boiled in water, and their freshness would blossom. And this crayfish had the wonderful freshness that belonged to the sea. It was just like the sweet smell that he smelled when he was playing in the sea with that madam. Abraham was right. This was the freshest live crayfish. Only a live crayfish could be so fresh and delicious. Only a live crayfish could blossom with its own freshness and bring back sweet memories. Although it's unbelievable, I have to admit that this is indeed a fresh crayfish from the sea. Randy nodded at Abraham, and couldn't help but praise, "I've never thought that I would be able to eat such fresh seafood in Chaos City. Just the fact that it's a live crayfish alone is worth more than 1,000 copper coins. Mr. Mac is indeed that kind of boss." Meg happened to hear Randy's exclamation, and lamented in his heart without blushing, "Yes. I also feel that I'm very kind. This crayfish is really delicious, and it's so big. I only need to peel the shell once, and I can eat until I'm full. This feeling is so blissful." While Randy and Abraham were still lamenting about the preciousness of this crayfish and the uniqueness of its cooking method, Vanessa had already peeled the shell, and was happily gnawing on the plump crayfish meat. The crayfish meat was already soaked in the spices, and the plump gravy brought about a very pleasant eating experience. It was fresh and spicy with a hint of sweetness. The feeling of gnawing on it was simply blissful. Although I've waited for 5 days, this crayfish dish of Mr. Mac's has completely exceeded my expectations. It's so worth it. Abraham took a sip of beer before heaving a long sigh of relief. He nodded, and said, "It really is a perfect match with beer. If only it could be a little heavier. I think it would be even better to eat that way." Randy raised his glass and clinked it with Abraham's. He took a sip, and smilingly said, "Of course, this doesn't affect its position in my heart at all. It's the #1 seafood." Most of the customers who ordered the crayfish were full of praise for it. At the same time, they were more tolerant of Meg's behavior of standing them up for 5 days. The popularity of crayfish also increased the sales of beer. Eating crayfish while drinking a glass of cold beer was a pleasant and wonderful feeling that no man could resist. After the lunch service ended, Meg calculated that he had sold a total of 500 crayfish. It was incomparable to the thousands of crayfish he had easily sold on Carapace Island. However, due to the increase in the unit price, the revenue had increased quite a bit. So, what's the use of just selling quantity? A low-profit strategy won't last long. Meg murmured in his heart. The good reputation that the restaurant had accumulated in the early stages made the promotion of the new product easy. Of course, the taste was the most important productivity. Raina, I've already called for a carriage for you. The coachman will help to move your things. You can go back and move your mother and the things you need to the dormitory, Meg said to Raina, who had just finished tidying up the kitchen, as he came back very quickly. Thank you, boss. Raina looked at the big carriage that was waiting outside the door, and bowed to Meg before taking off her apron and walking out. You've provided a dormitory for Raina? Irina asked Meg as she rubbed Ugly Duckling's chubby face. Meg glanced at Ugly Duckling, whose face had been rubbed into a square shape. It didn't dare to get angry or speak. He nodded, and said, yes. Raina is staying in the north of the city now, and it's too far from the restaurant. Firstly, it's inconvenient, and secondly, it's not safe for her to walk alone at night. Hence, I let her and her mother stay next to MIA and the rest. Millimeter HM, Irina responded. Raina's mother is sick, and it's quite serious. I would like you to take a look at her. Is that okay? Meg continued. Sure. I don't have anything to do in the afternoon anyway. Irina nodded. Also, I promised to treat Vanessa's teeth. I'm going to ask 1111 to come over and take a look to see if there's a more natural way to fix them. Do you want to come and take a look? She's been eating too much candy. If she doesn't stop eating candy, it won't take long for her teeth to become like that again even if they're fixed. Irina looked as if she had seen through everything. Eating candy is indeed a problem. Meg agreed with Irina's judgment. He then said, however, apart from the candy, there might be something else that's affecting her teeth. You're talking about that black thing, right? I don't know what that is, either. Irina shook her head. Meg frowned slightly. He thought for a moment and said, Vanessa has been brushing her teeth every day and has effectively removed a lot of the black stuff. If it's effective, then this problem can be suppressed by brushing her teeth every day. It shouldn't be a big problem. Raina didn't spend too much time moving because they didn't have much to take with them. As for the shabby quilts, bowls, and other daily necessities, she had already abandoned them under Meg's repeated reminders. She spent the most time convincing her mother to agree to throw away those things. Then she got on the carriage and headed to the new dormitory that Mr. Meg had provided for them. Of course, they had to go to the restaurant first. Mother, this is the restaurant where I work, Raina said with a smile as she helped Karen's out of the carriage after the carriage stopped. What a beautiful restaurant. Karen's eyes lit up as she looked at the restaurant with large floor-to-ceiling windows and exclaimed, Let's go. Mr. Meg should be waiting for us. Raina said with a smile as she carefully helped Karen's to the restaurant. She gently knocked on the door before pushing it open and walking in. Raina, Mrs. Karen's, you're here. Meg greeted them with a smile. Mr. Meg, thank you very much for your kindness in letting us stay in the dormitory that you provided. I'm really sorry for making you bear so much burden for a useless old lady like me. Karen's looked at Meg and said gratefully, This is a benefit that Raina should enjoy as a restaurant employee. It's also my duty to make sure that my employees don't get tired of living. Meg said with a smile as he introduced her, This is Princess Irina. She happened to be free today and promised to check your body. This. Raina's eyes lit up. After working in the restaurant for a while, she naturally knew Irina's identity. She didn't expect that someone of noble status would be willing to treat her mother. She looked at Meg with a bit more gratitude. It must be the boss who asked Princess Irina for this. Karen's heard this and hurriedly bowed to Meg and Irina. She said gratefully, Then, I'll thank you and your highness in advance. Chapter 1394. You're welcome. Irina reached out to help Karen's up. A green light flowed from her fingertips into Karen's wrist. Irina's fingertips tapped lightly, and the green light became brighter. The speed of the flow also increased. Karen's skin emitted a dense green light. She had already closed her eyes subconsciously. Her pale and tired face regained its color at a speed visible to the naked eye. Her short breaths also gradually calmed down. Raina stood at the side with a nervous expression. Her gaze gradually became joyful. This afternoon, she received very bad news from the doctor. Her mother's condition was very difficult to control. The doctor even asked her to give up treatment. But now, with Princess Irina's miraculous magic, her mother's condition seemed to be improving rapidly. About 3 minutes later, Irina withdrew her hand. "Mother," Raina stepped forward and grabbed Karen's hand. She was a little nervous, but also a little expectant. Karen's opened her eyes and touched her throat in disbelief. She then patted her chest and said in surprise, "My illness is cured." "That's great. That's great." Raina hugged Karen's happily. For the past 2 years, her mother had been bedridden. Her body was getting weaker and weaker. She didn't expect that she would be completely cured. Karen's also hugged Raina with a smile, but she quickly let go of her. She bowed deeply to Irina and said gratefully, "Your Highness, I don't know how to thank you for letting such a noble person treat my mother." "It's no problem. It's just a small matter," Irina said with a relaxed expression. "Your Highness, thank you for saving my mother." Raina also bowed deeply to Irina. Irina looked at Raina and said, "Your mother's body is still a little weak. Eat more nutritious food, such as bone broth, and she will soon recover to a normal person's body." "Yes, yes." Raina nodded quickly. "Raina, when you make soup in the future, pack a portion for Mrs. Karen's so that you don't have to go home and make it again," Meg said with a smile. The bone broth from the restaurant was definitely more nutritious than the bone broth from outside. Raina was a little hesitant. 50 copper coins per bowl. It will be deducted from your meal allowance. Millimeter. Raina smiled again, and nodded vigorously. Raina left with her mother. They had just moved to a new house and needed some time to get used to it. "Your life magic is getting stronger and stronger." Meg closed the door and looked at Irina, who was pinching a green wisteria leaf and watching it grow into a green wisteria on her fingertips. Irina put the devil's ivy back into the hydroponic vase and said calmly, "It's just a lack of vitality due to overwork. I helped her fill the gap. As long as she has enough nutrition, she'll recover very quickly." "That's good." Meg nodded. When Karen's came in just now, he had checked her health report. There were no major problems, but her body's indicators were on the low side. However, after Irina's life energy infusion, all her indicators had returned to normal. The problem of insufficient nutrition could be solved with a period of nourishment. "I went to the Grey Temple in the morning." Meg sat down opposite Irina. "That old man Roland found out that we did it." Irina raised her eyebrows. "I think they might have found out. At least, they have some suspicions." Meg nodded. "Then we can only silence them." Irina's face turned cold and murderous. Meg was taken aback. He hurriedly explained that, "Actually, we don't have to be so aggressive. I think they have good intentions towards us. They even took the initiative to help us create an alibi." Irina looked at Meg and suddenly laughed. As she laughed, she said, "You look so nervous. It's so funny." Meg's expression froze. Looking at Irina, who was laughing like a child, he sighed silently in his heart. What could he do? This was his wife. How could he fight back when she was teasing him? "I heard that you're quite close to a girl who buys clothes. Do you often drink tea together?" Irina's smile suddenly disappeared. She looked at Meg with some scrutiny. Meg raised his eyebrows. "Who leaked the news?" Although he was suddenly nervous, Meg's expression was still calm. He pretended to be relaxed and said with a smile, "You're talking about Miss Gloria, right? She's the boss of Suede Clothing. I'm a fashion designer in their store, so we have some contact at work. When we talk about work, we will drink tea or something. You know how to design clothes?" Irina was surprised. "I'm not that talented. All the staff uniforms in the restaurant, as well as all the clothes that Amy wears, were designed by me. Also, all the clothes that Suede Clothing launched were all designed by me." Meg raised his chin 45 degrees. "It's not that you're not talented. You're shameless." The system's angry voice sounded. "Really? I heard that store is the most popular women's clothing store in Chaos City now. I was planning to go and take a look." Irina looked at Meg with surprise and admiration. Meg was very satisfied with Irina's gaze and the fact that he had successfully led the conversation astray. He nodded and said, "Sure. They're going to launch a new down jacket soon. You can go and take a look." Down jacket? What kind of clothes are those? Are they made of feathers? Irina asked curiously. A down jacket is a kind of garment made by stuffing white goose down into the interlayer of the garment. The down jacket made this way is light, but it is very warm, Mag explained. I see. Irina pondered for a moment before her gaze landed on Ugly Duckling. Is it like ugly ducklings? It's a little ugly. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Irina in confusion. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling's fluffy feathers and shook his head. It's not this kind of fluffy feathers. All right. I'll go and take a look when I have time. Irina retracted her gaze and looked at Meg again. She asked with a smile, "But, how did you become his designer?" "That's a long story," Meg replied. "Of course, it would be best if he didn't tell her." "It's all right, I have all the time in the world." Irina sat calmly in the chair like a serious listener. Meg looked at Irina and said, "If we want to talk about this, we have to start with a bowl of tofu pudding." "This Miss Gloria, ding." The crisp sound of a bell interrupted Meg. Meg looked at the clock on the wall and walked to the door as he said, "It's time to meet Vanessa." No pop-up window. Chapter 1395. I'm here, Mr. Mac. Vanessa and Laura stood at the entrance of the restaurant and smiled at Meg. Meg had never seen Vanessa so cute. He nodded with a smile and said, "Come on in. I'll go get 1111. Okay." Vanessa nodded and walked past Meg with Laura into the restaurant. Meg heard the greetings behind him. He closed the door and walked to the magic potion shop next door. There was nothing going on between him and Gloria, but when it came to women, no matter how they tried to explain, it would seem that there was something going on between them. Luckily, Irina wasn't an unreasonable woman. Their conversation was safe and didn't reach the level of questioning. However, this also sent a signal to him. As a married man, he should be more careful when drinking tea with Gloria in the future. He couldn't let anyone see him. Meg walked into the magic potion shop and smelled the faint smell of potions. 1111 was standing in front of a pile of glassware with her back to the door. She was mixing magic potions carefully. Ever since 1111 became a professional potion maker in the magic potion shop, the business of the magic potion shop had skyrocketed. The customer flow brought by Mammoth also increased the business of the magic potion shop. Their main product, recovery potions, were twice as effective as other magic potions of the same price. They were in short supply every day. Julian had successfully become a hands-off boss. Of course, the turnover didn't matter to him. Meg stood aside and waited quietly for a while. 1111 put the blue-green liquid in the glassware into small bottles and closed the lids one by one. She was about to put the potions on the shelves when she noticed Meg standing in the shop. "Mr. Mac, when did you get here?" 1111 was surprised. She looked up at the clock on the wall. It was already 2:05. She said apologetically, "I'm sorry. It's easy to lose track of time when I'm busy mixing potions. I forgot the time we agreed on." "It's okay. I just got here too." Mixing magic potions requires full concentration. "Are you done now?" Meg said with a smile. "Yes, I'm done. Let's go. I'm so sorry to be late." 1111 put the magic potions on the shelf and followed Meg to the restaurant. Meg took 1111 back to the restaurant. Vanessa and Irina were chatting happily. 1111 greeted Irina with a smile. Then, Meg introduced her to Vanessa. "Since everyone is here, let's start the consultation on Miss Windsor's dental problem." Meg sat down next to Irina. Vanessa sat opposite the three of them and showed her teeth. Meg pointed at Vanessa's teeth with a pair of chopsticks and said, "First, let me introduce the condition of Miss Windsor's teeth. Half a month ago, her teeth were basically covered by this black substance, and it was accompanied by serious gum problems. After using Yunnan Baiyaro toothpaste to brush her teeth scientifically, the gum problems have been effectively controlled, and the black substance has decreased significantly. Obviously, brushing scientifically can remove and suppress this substance. The main problem now is how to clean up the black stains inside the holes caused by the moths and fill them up so that the teeth can return to normal. Then, she can continue to brush her teeth every day as a long-term solution so that she can have a healthy set of teeth. Life magic and light magic won't be able to purify the substance, but I can soften the ivory and fill it up. It's how elves fill their teeth, Irina said. That's not a bad idea, but if the substance isn't cleaned up, the remaining teeth will be corroded from the inside. Meg looked at 1111. I can try. 1111 nodded and took the chopsticks from Meg's hand. A light green light surrounded the chopsticks, and the color of the chopsticks quickly turned green. Branches grew out from the edges, and green bamboo leaves grew out. That's impressive. Vanessa and Laura both looked at the chopsticks in astonishment. The bamboo chopsticks transformed into slender green bamboo poles, and the speed at which she was able to use them was much faster than when she had first used them in front of Mag. Clearly, 1111's world tree had recovered significantly after receiving Irina's help. Miss Vanessa, please show me your teeth. 1111 stood up and walked up to Vanessa. Vanessa opened her mouth as she was told. If her teeth could be cured, she would be able to eat all the delicious food she wanted to eat in the future. Almost every tooth was filled with holes of different sizes. Some of them had even penetrated through the entire tooth. The pain was unimaginable. The black substance in the holes was not beautiful at all. 1111 put the thin bamboo stick in her hand on Vanessa's teeth like a toothbrush. The thin bamboo stick started to break down like snow melting. Tiny green light spots scattered on Vanessa's teeth. The black substance in the holes and on the surface of Vanessa's teeth melted away instantly when it came into contact with the green light spots, just like oil in contact with a powerful detergent. It seems to be effective. 1111 smiled. She continued to control the thin bamboo stick to slide over Vanessa's teeth, breaking down the substance in an efficient way. Is it really effective? Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she asked in a muffled voice. She only felt that the spot where her teeth had been touched was cold and refreshing. If not for the bamboo in her mouth, she would have wanted to see how her teeth had changed. It's very effective. A smile also appeared on Mag's face. As expected, calling 1111 along was the right decision. Normal magic was completely ineffective against this black stain, but 1111 was most likely the last druid in this world who was capable of nature magic. Nature magic was simply too effective against this black stain. Yeah, princess, the substance is really gone, Laura also said excitedly. She didn't even notice what she had just said. About 3 minutes later, the thin bamboo stick in 1111's hand had completely melted. Vanessa's teeth were as white as new. There were no longer any black substance on them. Take a look at the effect. Meg handed a mirror to Vanessa. Vanessa held the mirror with both hands and stared blankly at her snow-white teeth for a full minute. She finally put down the mirror and jumped up from the chair. She hugged 1111 and said with tears of gratitude, "Thank you, Sister 1111, thank you so much. Don't worry about it, it's nothing." 1111 patted Vanessa's back with a smile. She could imagine how painful it must have been for a beautiful girl to be troubled by her teeth. Now that the substance is gone, let's start filling your teeth. Irina took out a pure white elephant tusk and a small knife. She then looked at Vanessa and said, "Do you want to fill in your teeth, or do you want a full set of elephant tusks?" Chapter 1396. Can you make a full set of ivory? Vanessa looked at the ivory tusks in Irina's hand with a hint of surprise on her face. Of course you can. Otherwise, how do you think the elves who are over 700 years old get their mouths full of teeth? Their teeth start to fall off when they're over 600 years old, and all of them have a full set of ivory by the time they're over 700 years old. Irina nodded with a confident smile as she said, "Also, with this set of ivory, you'll be a level higher than a dog." What does this have to do with dogs? Vanessa asked with a perplexed look on her face. Nothing good ever comes out of a dog's mouth, but you'll be able to do it in the future. Irina smiled. Vanessa faltered upon hearing this, but Meg and the others couldn't help but burst into laughter. It sounds very impressive, but I still want to keep my teeth. Big sister Irina, please use your ivory to help me fill in my teeth, please. Vanessa looked at Irina with a sincere expression. The problem with her teeth had been plaguing her for many years. She would always tell herself that it didn't matter if she didn't have any friends and that she couldn't appear in public. However, who didn't want to wear a beautiful evening gown and appear at the most lavish banquet in the world? She didn't want to be that ugly freak who didn't dare to show her face in public. She didn't want to hide in a palace in the outskirts of Rodu. Of course, the most important thing was that she really wanted to try spicy grilled fish and spicy hot pot. Open your mouth. Irina lifted Vanessa's chin before slicing off a small piece of ivory with a small knife. She curled her finger, and the rice-sized pieces of ivory floated into the air before being quickly softened and transformed by golden light before being injected into the cavity. The speed at which the ivory was softened and filled in was extremely fast. Around 2 to 3 minutes later, Irina withdrew her finger, and Vanessa's mouth had been completely repaired. Moreover, the color of the ivory was exactly the same as the original color of the teeth. There were no traces of filling, and even the curvature of the surface of the teeth did not feel out of place. That's great, miss. Miss, your teeth have really recovered. They're neat and white now, Laura said in surprise, tears of excitement welling up in her eyes. Vanessa held up the mirror and looked at her neat, white teeth. She was stunned for a while before tears streamed down her face. Are you not satisfied? Irina came over to take a look and asked. No, look, she's such a beautiful girl. How could she be buried by a mouthful of teeth? Vanessa shook her head with a sorrowful expression. Irina nodded and said seriously, yes, if I had fixed my teeth earlier, I might have been betrothed to some demon prince, the kind with eyeballs all over his body. Vanessa was stunned, and even her tears stopped. She looked at Irina in horror. I lied to you. Irina stroked Vanessa's hair with a smile. Without waiting for her expression to calm down, she continued, the Roth Empire is not on good terms with the fear demons. They might also find you a forest troll prince with geckos all over his body. What? Vanessa burst into tears immediately. She covered her mouth with a pitiful expression, and said, I'm most afraid of geckos. I don't want any demon prince or forest troll prince. I don't want to marry a prince. Vanessa's gaze scanned the restaurant, and landed on Meg. She looked at Meg pleadingly, and said, Mr. Mac, please marry me. Her. Meg, who was just watching the show, was stunned. Why did she suddenly ask him to marry Vanessa? Does he dare? Irina looked at Meg with a smile. I really don't dare. I'm still worried that Duke Abraham will tear my hand off. Meg quickly waved his hand. What a joke. If he dared to nod, Irina would tear his hand off. However, after her rotten teeth were fixed, Vanessa could indeed be called a beautiful young lady. She had perfectly inherited the royal bloodline and looks. Meg had seen the queen at the palace banquet before. Vanessa had inherited her beauty and elegance. She had a tall figure and a slender neck, just like a white swan. Ding! Congratulations, host, for completing Vanessa's tooth repair mission. Reward, a durian pizza recipe. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Meg didn't have any objections. It was a difficult and lengthy mission, but thankfully, he had completed it with the help of 1111 and Irina. The threat of tooth decay had been completely eliminated. Vanessa was a little disappointed to be rejected by Meg. Even though her teeth had been fixed, was Mr. Mac still not interested in her? Vanessa, now that your teeth have been fixed, you can eat whatever you want. As long as you keep the habit of brushing your teeth every day, you won't have to worry about tooth decay in the future, Meg said with a smile. That's right. Vanessa's eyes lit up, and a smile reappeared on her face. She looked at Meg, and said, Then can I try the insanely spicy grilled fish and spicy hot pot tonight? If you want to try, I won't stop you. Meg nodded. That's great. Vanessa's smile became even brighter. She thought for a moment, and hurriedly asked Laura to open her bag. She took out a bag full of money and handed it to Meg. She said, "Mr. Mac, this is a little reward for helping me heal my tooth. Thank you very much." "You're welcome." Meg took the heavy bag and accepted it without hesitation. It was a good deal to treat it as a business deal. After all, they weren't close yet, and he was enemies with her father and 2 brothers. He had already done his best. Vanessa took off a white jade pendant from her body and solemnly handed it to 1111. She said gratefully, "Sister 1111, this is my favorite jade pendant. Thank you for helping me heal my tooth." "Thank you." 1111 looked at the jade pendant. It was smooth and warm to the touch, and there were beautiful patterns on the surface. She thought for a moment, and accepted the jade pendant. Vanessa looked at Irina and thought for a moment. She was a little distressed. "It's okay. With our friendship, you can just give me 1 or 200 million. Irina smiled. "I see. Then I'll have to go back and ask my father for it." Vanessa was a little distressed. "Then you can owe him for now. Ask him to send the money. After all, you're in my hands now," Irina said with a relaxed expression. "That's right. Then I'll write him a letter tonight." Vanessa nodded. Meg looked at Irina, who looked like she was cheating a child out of her pocket money. He could only pretend that he didn't know anything. Of course, he didn't dare to ask anything. Vanessa left happily. 1111 also left. Only Meg and Irina were left in the restaurant. Meg looked at Irina, who was staring at him. He shook the bag of money in his hand, and then poured it on the table. A bag of dragon coins fell out. He said with a smile, "That's a good deal. Are restaurant owners nowadays so concerned about their customers' dental health? I saw that some of the old men's teeth weren't very good today," Irina said with a smile. Chapter 1397. We watched Vanessa grow up. We couldn't bear to see her so sad because of her teeth, so we decided to help her, Meg said honestly. "Millimeter, it's pretty good. I wanted to help her get rid of it before, but I couldn't get rid of that black substance. Look at how she smiles. She looks exactly the same as when she was young." Irina nodded with a smile on her face. Meg closed the door and sat down opposite Irina. He asked, "Are you used to the elves we brought back 2 days ago? Those who joined the night elves have similar experiences. It's pretty good that they're together to keep each other warm." Irina nodded, but her expression was still a little gloomy. "I got the latest news about the various races from the Grey Temple this morning, including the Wind Forest. Do you want to take a look?" "I haven't had the time to take a look yet," Meg said to her as he stood up. "All right." Irina stood up and followed Meg upstairs to the study. Meg took out the box from the secret compartment, unlocked it, and opened it. There were 8 craft paper bags inside, which represented the 8 races. There was also a slightly smaller wooden box under the paper bags. It should contain the information that Roland didn't disclose to him previously. Information about the Wind Forest. Meg took out a craft paper bag and passed it to Irina. It should contain the information about the Wind Forest during this period of time. Irina took the craft paper bag and sat down in front of the study table. She began to browse through it seriously. Her information channels were cut off after she came to Chaos City, so first-hand information like this was very precious. On the night before the Wind Forest Allied forces launched their attack, most of the Night Elves left the underground cavern through the tunnel and returned to the Wind Forest to spread the Night Elves' mission. She was most concerned about their situation now. Meg pulled out the paper bag on the Demon Islands and sat down on another chair. He began to carefully read through the information. He was also quite curious as to how their trip to the Demon Islands had affected the demon tribe. 2 hours passed quickly, and Meg was still looking at the strength comparison between the Fear Demons and the Shiles. Irina put down all the information in her hands and looked at Meg. "I'm going to the Wind Forest." Meg raised his head and looked at Irina in surprise. "Did something happen?" "In 3 days, Helena will officially make Sally the princess of the elven race, and burn all the traitors they've caught," Irina said in a cold voice. Dark elves. Meg heard from Irina that the batch of night elves who had followed her for the longest time had already returned to the wind forest, and were preparing to instigate more elves to join the night elves. Irina nodded. Yes. The night elves have been promoting freedom, and more elves have been inspired by freedom. They joined the organization and kept expanding the scale of the night elves. This phenomenon has already appeared everywhere in the wind forest. It's like a spark that's brewing a prairie fire. Helena and those ruling elves have already sensed the threat, so they've captured a batch of night elves and labeled them as traitors. They're preparing to kill them to intimidate the other elves. You intend to save them? Meg was also a little surprised by the speed of the night elves' spread and development. Those night elves who were like sparks could ignite the fire so quickly. It was evident that the internal situation of the elves was indeed very bad. I have to go, Irina said with certainty. Okay, then I'll go with you. Meg said. After breaking through to the 9th tier, he had the ability to protect himself in front of a 10th tier being with RZ. Even if he couldn't provide too much help to Irina, he could at least intimidate the other elves. Okay. Irina looked at Meg with a slight smile. She didn't know when it started, but she was already used to him saying that he would accompany her. Their purpose this time, other than killing the chicken to warn the monkey, may also be a trap for you. Before we go, we need to make some preparations, Meg said with a slight frown. In the wind forest, I'm stronger than they think. The tree of life will stand on my side. Irina's expression was rather relaxed. That's good. Meg didn't doubt Irina's judgment. The tree of life was the holy tree of the elves, and had existed for thousands of years. With it on Irina's side, their chances of winning would indeed be higher. Of course, he still had to make some preparations. He had to ensure Irina's safety. After looking at the time, Meg went downstairs to prepare for the evening business. The restaurant's business hours were the longest at night, and it was also the busiest time. Where's the crayfish restaurant? How could such a big crayfish restaurant disappear? Tony stood in front of the ruins, and yelled with a look of despair. This. Steve was also dumbfounded. How could the crayfish restaurant disappear overnight? The fisherman who came to sell crayfish with a bucket was already there for the 3rd time. He was also dumbfounded when he saw the crayfish restaurant suddenly turned into ruins. He originally wanted to make a fortune by catching crayfish, but he didn't expect that the restaurant would disappear when he caught crayfish to sell. Only a pile of ruins was left behind. Tony panicked a little, and grabbed Steve as he said, "It's over, it's over. The manuscript that was sent out has already been finalized and printed. It's probably on the way to distribute the goods now. If the article goes viral, and the crayfish restaurant disappears, do you think the readers will tear me apart?" Steve glanced at the ruins, and then nodded at Tony. "I suggest you go out and lie low for the time being." He could even imagine how those readers who came over excitedly would go berserk after seeing the ruins. With Tony's influence, there would definitely be many demons who would come to Carapace Island for a taste. Boss Hades has misled me. He didn't even tell me in advance that he was going to leave. Isn't he pushing me into the fire pit? Tony pulled a long face, and felt that his future was bleak. I'm such a pitiful man. Why don't you go to Chaos City to lie low for a while? I'll write you a letter to ask you to come back after this storm blows over, Steve suggested. It seems like that's the only way now. Tony nodded because he already saw those customers who couldn't eat the crayfish starting to vent their anger by bombarding the ruins. If his readers came here, they would probably vent their anger on him in the same way. It's best that I don't meet that boss Hades again. Otherwise, I'll definitely press him to the ground and give him a good beating. Then, I'll make him give me an explanation. Tony clenched his teeth, and turned to leave resentfully. He had to pack his things and leave. Chapter 1398. Uncle Abraham, my teeth are fix. Vanessa couldn't help but exclaim happily as soon as she walked into the courtyard. Princess, you have to pay attention to your manners. Laura reminded her softly with an equally excited smile on her face. Tooth. Tooth fixed. Abraham ran out of the house next door with a whoosh. He only had one shoe on his feet, and stared at Vanessa with wide eyes. "Princess, your teeth are really fixed. Here, look." Vanessa opened her mouth, and showed Abraham her teeth, which had become white and neat. "It's true. They're neat and white." Abraham's eyes lit up, and he clapped his hands excitedly. "That's great. Our little princess has become a beautiful girl again. His Majesty and the Queen will be very happy if they know about this." He had watched Vanessa grow up, and he knew how much she had suffered because of her teeth. "I'm a beautiful girl, all right?" Vanessa said with a smile. "Did Mr. Mac heal you?" Abraham asked. "No, Mr. Mac, Big Sister 1111, and Big Sister Irina helped me." Vanessa shook her head. So it was Princess Irina who did it. Abraham was enlightened, but he wasn't too surprised. He also knew that Vanessa and Irina had a good relationship. "Yes, I've already paid Mr. Mac and Big Sister 1111, but I haven't paid Big Sister Vanessa yet. Do you have 100 million copper coins with you?" 100 million. Abraham's eyelids twitched. Although it wasn't a big sum to him, 100 million copper coins for a tooth repair seemed a little extortionate. He had heard about Irina establishing the Night Elves and rebelling against the Wind Forest. It was understandable that she was tight on money now that she had so many mouths to feed. "If you don't have it, then I'll write a letter to Father to ask for it." "He should have it," Vanessa said. "You don't have to look for Her Majesty. It's only 100 million. Just take it as Uncle paying for your tooth," Abraham said with a smile. He took out a leather wallet from his pocket and pulled out a 100 million copper coin deposit receipt from Buffett Banks, handing it to Vanessa. "Thank you, Uncle Abraham." Vanessa took the deposit slip and said with a smile, "Then let's go try the insanely spicy hot pot tonight." Insanely spicy. "Mr. Mac, in the future, if you take little Amy out for more than 3 days, please let me know in advance. My body is quite strong, so it's not a problem for me to follow you around. I can even be little Amy's bodyguard. If you encounter any trouble or encounter any difficult ingredients, I can help you solve it." Crassus walked to the entrance of the restaurant and looked at Meg with a smile. He looked quite friendly, but there was a hint of disdain in his smile. "Well." Meg raised an eyebrow. Although bringing Crassus with him meant that he had a super bodyguard, it was not convenient at all. Their family time together was very precious. Julian walked up to him and said in a cold voice, "If I'm here, I'll freeze any magic beasts or people with evil intentions that dare to come within 100 meters of Amy. If there's a chance next time, I'll definitely ask the two of you to come along." Meg smiled, feeling a little guilty. After all, he had just skipped 5 days of classes with Amy. Crassus and Julian were probably going to skin him alive. What a pair of clingy masters. Amy hugged Ugly Duckling and heaved a resigned sigh. Crassus and Julian blushed. They didn't expect to be criticized like that by their precious disciple one day. The braised crayfish successfully gained a good reputation among the customers. This new dish brought a huge surprise to the customers, and allowed the residents of Chaos City who lived inland to enjoy the scrumptious crayfish that was full of seafood flavor. The combination of braised crayfish and beer also spread like wildfire, and almost became a standard dish. A mouthful of crayfish skulls full of crayfish roe, and a refreshing cold beer. All the flavors of the world were in it. Since Raina could already make all kinds of hot pot bases easily, Meg gave her full authority over the designated hot pot area, and he was responsible for cooking the other dishes. This greatly reduced his workload, and at the same time, generated more revenue for the restaurant. After the dinner service ended, MIA and the rest helped to clean up the restaurant, and then left. Meg walked to the door. Just as he was about to close and lock the door, a hand pressed on it. "Camilla, you haven't gone back yet." Meg opened the door, and was a little surprised to see Camilla standing at the door. She was in charge of preparing the ingredients, and had left before the restaurant opened for business. Camilla leaned against the door frame, and looked up at Meg. Her voice was firm, and she said, "I can't sleep, and I want to drink. The kind that won't stop until I'm drunk. Will you accompany me?" Mag raised his eyebrows as he looked at Camilla, who was wearing a high-slit black dress that revealed her long and slender legs. She was exuding an aura of a big sister. A beauty invited him to drink with her in the middle of the night, and the kind that won't stop until he's drunk. What should he do? This scene didn't seem to be very harmonious, did it? Won't stop until he's drunk. An oppressive voice sounded from behind Meg. The half-open door was pulled open, and Irina stood beside Meg with a half-smile. She looked at Camilla, and said, "I'll accompany you." "You? Why are you here?" Camilla looked at Irina, who was standing beside Meg, and was instantly shocked. Her domineering aura was completely lost, and she was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on by a mouse. She subconsciously jumped back and looked at Irina in surprise, and then at Meg. "What's your relationship? What a coincidence." "I can't sleep either, and I just happened to want to find someone to drink until he's drunk. Looks like we've found the same person," Irina said with a smile, and put her right hand on Meg's shoulder. Her domineering aura was fully unleashed, and she had a victorious smile on her face. Then you guys drink first." Camilla looked at Meg with a complicated gaze, and turned to leave. "Why, are you scared?" Irina said with a chuckle. Camilla stopped in her tracks and gritted her teeth. "This is too much." She adjusted her expression, and turned back to look at Irina. She said in a relaxed tone, "What's there to be scared of?" "Scared that you'll eat me? That's hard to say. Come in." Irina smiled meaningfully. When she turned around, she glanced at Meg, and casually found a chair to sit down. Camilla also glanced at Meg, and when she walked past him, she snorted with a nasal sound, and sat down directly opposite Irina. "Mag, what did I do? I clearly didn't do anything, okay? 2 glasses of beer, and any barbecue." Irina raised her hand, and then looked at Camilla. "What do you want?" "Me. As long as there's enough beer," Camilla said indifferently. Chapter 1399. Meg did not know why he had to continue being the chef after the opening hours to roast beef kebabs, grilled fish, and grilled prawns for the 2 women who were drinking, although the combination of barbecue and beer was really cool. But as a persecuted person, he was also very confused now. Standing beside the barbecue grill, Meg took a bite of the grilled beef and chewed it, letting the hot taste bloom in his mouth. Then, he took a sip of beer, experiencing the wonderful enjoyment of the ice and fire while observing the 2 women who were gradually getting better after drinking a few glasses of beer. Alcohol boosts courage. After a few glasses of beer, Camilla's aura gradually returned to her. She looked at Irina, and said, You say, why do they all want to use me? Am I just something that can be used in exchange for benefits in their eyes? Even my father can betray me time and time again. Am I too ridiculous?" Irina also began to get a little drunk. She supported herself with one hand on the table and nodded seriously at Camilla. "It's not just ridiculous, it's simply pitiful." Camilla was stunned, and then began to wipe her tears. "You say, why am I so pitiful?" Listening to Camilla's description, Meg roughly understood why she wanted to get drunk tonight. It seemed that returning to the Demon Islands this time had a big impact on her, and she had no one to talk to, so she came to drink in the middle of the night. "It's okay. For you vampires, these difficulties and setbacks are nothing. At least you haven't experienced being watched eating grass." Irina comforted, "Why don't you try eating grass too? Maybe you can become the ancestor of vampires." "You mean, Uncle Dracula became the ancestor of vampires because he ate grass?" Camilla was a little doubtful. "If you don't try, how do you know it won't work?" Irina smiled. Camilla thought for a while and nodded. Then, she turned her head and shouted at Meg in the kitchen, "Boss, give me a plate of grass." When dealing with drunk women, he had to try his best to satisfy all their unreasonable requests. This was the experience that Meg had accumulated over the years. Therefore, he directly placed a plate of lettuce in front of Camilla, and then returned to the kitchen to continue watching the drinking game between the women. Camilla looked at the fresh green lettuce in front of her and narrowed her eyes. As a noble vampire, being a vegetarian was a shameful thing for vampires. Naturally, she had never done it before. Eat it. If you eat it, you might become the next ancestor of vampires, Irina said, trying to tempt him. Camilla's throat moved. If she became the ancestor of vampires, no one would be able to force her to do anything. With her powerful strength and high status in the clan, even her father would have to bow respectfully when he saw her. What a tempting vision. Camilla grabbed a piece of lettuce and slowly brought it to her mouth. Meg silently took out the photo stone. This was the second vampire to actively eat grass, and it might even be the ancestor of the vampires in the future. What a memorable scene. Crunch. The tender lettuce made a crisp sound when she bit into it. The strange texture made Camilla slightly uncomfortable, but it was not as disgusting as she had expected. Instead, the texture was quite refreshing. After confirming that she could accept the taste, Camilla began to chew. Although the texture was a little strange, the taste of the leaf was quite refreshing and sweet. Surprisingly, it was not bad. Instead, it was very greasy, and it refreshed her mouth after eating roast beef. "How is it?" Irina asked. "I didn't expect it to be quite delicious." Camilla nodded and threw the remaining half of the leaf into her mouth to chew. When Dracula ate grass for the first time, he said the same thing, Irina said with a smile. Meg's expression was a little strange. He could imagine that Dracula was half tricked and half coaxed to eat his first grass. Then, he embarked on the path of no return of eating grass. Then, after N years, Camilla walked on this path again. "Is that so? Uncle Dracula's taste is indeed quite similar to mine." Camilla nodded, and then her gaze fell on the roast beef kebab in front of her. She used her chopsticks to take a piece of beef from the bamboo skewer, wrapped it in the lettuce leaf, and put it into her mouth. After chewing, her eyes lit up. The oil of the roast beef was absorbed by the lettuce leaf, and the taste of the meat itself was not affected. It was exceptionally refreshing and delicious. "I didn't expect grass to be so delicious. It's even more delicious when wrapped in meat," Camilla said with some surprise. "Really?" Camilla handed a piece of lettuce leaf to Irina. "Try it too." Irina wrapped a piece of beef and put it into her mouth. The combination of meat and vegetables did make the roast beef much more refreshing. After eating a lot of roast beef kebabs, changing to such a refreshing taste was a very good way to eat. She nodded and admitted, "It is indeed a very good way to eat. You are really talented at eating grass. Your future is promising. Isn't it just a piece of lettuce leaf? Don't make a fuss." Meg glanced at the leftover lettuce leaf at the side, and also picked up a piece of lettuce to wrap 2 pieces of roast beef. He put it into his mouth together, and it tasted like Korean roast meat. After finishing the entire plate of grass and 2 glasses of beer, the two of them both passed out on the table drunk. Although they were already drunk, they still carried on a conversation. With such a low alcohol tolerance, don't say anything about not resting until you're drunk. "Aren't you sending yourself to another bed?" Meg put down the glass and walked out of the kitchen. He looked at the 2 drunk women, and said to himself helplessly. After carrying Irina back to the room and putting her on the bed, Meg went downstairs and looked at Camilla, who was still lying on the table. It was too late to throw her out. He didn't know what would happen if she was picked up by someone, but if she stayed, Meg carried her upstairs, made a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom, and put her directly on the floor. The survival logic was simple. No matter which room he put Camilla in, he could do something inappropriate to her while she was drunk. But if he put her in Irina's room, then there wouldn't be a problem. He believed that Irina wouldn't believe that he had the guts to do anything under her nose. Meg had just put Camilla down and was about to go downstairs to tidy up when his arm was suddenly grabbed. At the same time, Camilla mumbled, "I don't want to marry that trash Knox. I'd rather marry that wretched boss than marry him. Even if he can't do it, at least the dishes he cooks are delicious." "Meg, why can't he do it?" Mag retracted his hand as he looked at Camilla, who was sleeping soundly, and went downstairs, feeling a little baffled. This was a great humiliation to him. If he wasn't being watched by the heavenly axiom, he would have proven whether he could do it or not. "Hee, you don't have the guts." The system mocked online. Chapter 1400. Hee, you don't have a dick. Meg replied with a sneer. As a system, I don't need such a thing. Hee, even eunuchs would comfort themselves like this. Host, please respect the system, the system said sternly. You don't have one, but I do. So, this is the best evidence that I'm your father. Meg smiled. Meg went downstairs and cleaned up the mess left by the two drunk women. Then, he went upstairs to wash up and lay on the bed. Lying on the bed, Meg took out the photostone and looked at it. Little dark room, whip, candle, Aya. Mag only realized that he had taken out the wrong photostone after watching half of it. He kept this evil photostone, and took out another one. He nodded with satisfaction as he watched Camilla eating a piece of lettuce happily. The image was very clear, and her expression was on point. It was worth keeping as a memento. If Camilla really became the ancestor of vampires in the future, Meg could give this photostone to her as a congratulatory gift. The first experience of eating grass. After putting away the photostone, Meg closed his eyes and calmed down for a while. Then, he opened the durian pizza experience bag in his mind. Meg's attitude towards durian was that he could accept it, but he didn't like it very much. Durian had a special fragrance. For many people, this smell was extremely smelly and hard to accept. But once they accepted this fragrance and tasted the durian themselves, most people would be mesmerized by the amazing taste and taste. This was similar to the treatment of stinky tofu. The combination of durian and pizza should be a relatively new combination. He didn't remember commenting on durian pizza before. Why would the system give this recipe to him as a reward? A lot of information entered his mind. In a short period of time, he had already mastered the skills of a top pizza chef. I wonder if Amy will like it. Meg muttered. It wasn't easy to obtain this menu. Of course, there was no reason for him to not learn it. It looked quite simple, and it wasn't a bad idea to use the remaining time to consolidate his strength. Concentrating, he pushed open the test field for the god of cookery. Meg's feet were empty, and he fell into the pile of durian. Spikes stood upright, and Meg jumped up on the spot. His bare feet stepped on the spikes, and he directly waltzed on the pile of durian. Fuck. Meg couldn't help but swear. He tried to find some space at the edge and stood on one leg. The most important step in making durian pizza is to choose a high-quality durian. The quality of the durian directly determines the quality of the durian pizza. Therefore, in order for the host to have a better understanding of how to choose durians, the system has prepared 10,000 durians of different qualities for the host. Among them, there are 50 that can meet the standard. Please choose at least 10 high-quality durians. The system's voice sounded. 50 correct answers. Meg looked at the ground full of durians, and 10,000 alpacas ran through his heart. He could conclude that the system was using its power to avenge private grudges. However, after the system finished speaking, it went completely silent. The method to choose durian was indeed in the information that Meg had received before, and it didn't seem difficult. To choose durian, simply put, it was to look, smell, and pinch. Look, it was to see if the durian's shape was round and full, and if the color was yellow and transparent. Generally, the size couldn't be too small. Smell, it was to smell the smell of the durian that opened naturally. Generally, the smell of a mature durian was rich and fragrant, making one drool. Pinch, it was to pinch two adjacent spikes on the surface of the durian to see if it could be easily pulled together. The shell of a mature durian would also become soft. Was it simple? It did seem very simple. However, when you were faced with 10,000 durians, you wouldn't think that way. Meg looked around. This was a sealed space. Just like before, if he didn't complete the mission, he probably wouldn't be able to get out. Alright, it's just 10 durians. What's the big deal? Meg moved the durian by his feet forward, and he directly threw the half-collapsed and crooked durian into the corner. Choosing durians was a tough job, and one had to suffer from the scourge of spikes. Moreover, being trapped in such a completely sealed space, the rich smell of 10,000 durians was almost suffocating. If it was a durian enthusiast here, he would probably faint from happiness. Meg first used the observation method to eliminate most of the durians, then he began to pinch the spikes with his hands, eliminating all the durians that were too soft and too hard. Meg didn't know how much time had passed, but finally, there were only about 500 durians left in front of him. They were all big and full. In the corner behind him, the durians had already piled up into a mountain, and many of them were directly stuck to the wall. "All right, now let me smell you little fairies and see which of you are qualified." Meg picked up a durian casually, put it in front of his nose, and sniffed it. The fragrance was very strong, and it was the smell of a ripe durian. "Qualified?" Meg frowned. He felt that it was a little too casual to pick up a random one and say that it was qualified. After hesitating for a while, Meg put the durian in his hand in the pending area. Then he picked up the second durian. The fragrance of this one was a little more fragrant than the previous one. It was sweet, but the difference wasn't so obvious. After peeling it, he still didn't know which one would taste better. Pending. Meg also put the durian in his hand in the pending area, then picked up the third durian. Pending. Pending. Meg walked around and put 499 durians in the pending area, eliminating one durian. Hee hee. Meg looked at the durians in the pending area and sneered. There was no fucking difference at all. What smell was a little stronger, a little lighter, a little grassy? In such a completely enclosed space, facing the impact of the smell of 10,000 durians, how could he smell the slight difference? He wasn't Connie. Sitting beside the pile of durians and thinking about life for a while, Meg suddenly realized something. He raised his head and asked, "System, when the time comes, you will provide me with the best durians, right?" "Of course." The durians provided by the system are planted in the Durian Islands in the boundless sea. The sun is abundant, the soil is fertile, and the durians that grow there are completely superior to the king of the Cat Mountain. Strictly following the principle of ripe melons will fall, every single durian is naturally ripe. And every single durian has gone through several procedures to select the best quality durian and send it to the host. The system said confidently. "Then why do you ask me to choose a hammer here?" Meg rolled his eyes and wanted to tear the system apart. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.